Tonight, we're stepping off the familiar paths of the internet and into its shadowed underbelly, the dark web. It's a place shrouded in mystery and often real danger. What happens when curiosity leads someone too deep? When a digital exploration turns into a real-world nightmare? We're about to hear a chilling account, a true crime story where navigating the dark web wasn't just risky, it was a deadly mistake. Get ready, this is True Crime Dark Web Was a Deadly Mistake Scary Stories. My name is Jake Riley. That feels like a necessary anchor right now, something solid to hold on to in the swirling mess my life has become. Most people have hobbies, passions. Some collect stamps, others hike mountains, maybe restore old cars. Me? I collect disappearances. Not literally, of course. I don't have a basement filled with missing person posters yellowing under bare bulbs, though sometimes my cramped one-bedroom apartment feels close. No, my collection is digital, mental, an ever-expanding archive of the void left behind when someone simply vanishes. It started young, maybe younger than is healthy. A kid from my elementary school, Billy Dennison, didn't show up one Monday. They found his bike by the creek, mud caked on the wheels, kickstand down like he'd just stopped for a moment. But Billy? Gone. No trace. The police searched, volunteers combed the woods, his face smiled sadly from milk cartons for a while. Then, silence. The case went cold, filed away, another name added to a list that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't just the mystery, the puzzle of it, that hooked me. It was the absence. The sudden, inexplicable hole punched in the fabric of reality. Where did Billy go? What were his last thoughts? That fundamental unknowing became a morbid gravitational pull I couldn't escape. Through high school and into a string of dead-end data entry jobs, the fascination deepened, festered. The internet became my hunting ground. Forums dedicated to cold cases, subreddits dissecting grainy security footage, blogs meticulously detailing the last known movements of people who stepped out for cigarettes and never came back. I devoured it all. Elisa Lamb in the water tank, the solder children vanishing after the fire, Murray's abandoned car on a snowy New Hampshire road. Each case was a breadcrumb trail leading to a cliff edge. My browser history was a roadmap of human tragedy. My social life withered. Conversations about weekend plans or office gossip felt trivial, thin, compared to the weight of these unresolved vanishings. My apartment became a haven, but also a prison, lined with the digital ghosts of the lost. Stacks of printouts, folders overflowing with timelines, theories ranging from the plausible to the outright bizarre, alien abduction, interdimensional portals, government conspiracies. I entertained them all, sifted through them, searching for a pattern, a key, anything that might offer a glimpse into the abyss. Which brings me to last Tuesday. Or maybe it was Wednesday morning by then. Time blurs when you're mainlining caffeine and chasing shadows online. The city outside my window was asleep, rain slicking the streets, the only sounds the hum of my aging desktop PC and the frantic drumming of my own heart, artificially accelerated by the fourth cup of cheap instant coffee. I was deep down a rabbit hole, clicking through layers of obscure links, forums nested within forums, the kind of places that required specific browsers and a certain disregard for digital safety. The surface web felt like a brightly lit lobby. This was the unlit basement, damp and smelling vaguely of mildew and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just following the usual scent, mentions of unsolved cases, particularly ones with little evidence, the truly baffling ones. A cryptic post on an encrypted message board mentioned a different kind of archive. Another hinted at live documentation. My cynicism, usually a well-honed shield, was dulled by exhaustion and that ever-present morbid curiosity. It's an insidious thing, that curiosity. It whispers possibilities, dares you to look, assures you that you're safe behind the screen. That's how I found it. Not through a direct search. You couldn't find this place that way. It was a link disguised as corrupted data in a file shared on a peer-to-peer network known for hosting taboo material. The forum's name was stark, chillingly simple, The Empty Room. No flashy graphics, no banner ads. Just a plain black background, white text, and a login prompt. Registration required an invitation code, which, disturbingly, was embedded in the metadata of the corrupted file I downloaded. It felt less like a community and more like a meticulously hidden trap. Once inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly sterile. Threads with cryptic titles, Session 4B, Acquisition Log 7, Current Occupant. The few user comments visible were terse, coded, almost inhumanly detached. There was no chatter, no speculation, just observation. Then I saw the sticky post at the top, live viewings, admission required. My stomach churned. Live viewings of what? The implication hung heavy in the digital air. I clicked it. A simple text page loaded. It claimed to host encrypted, members-only streams. Streams of individuals held captive. It presented itself clinically, almost like a research database. Observe subjects in controlled environments. Witness unfiltered human response. It was disgusting, repellent. My first instinct was to slam my laptop shut, bleach my hard drive, maybe even myself. But that cold, obsessive part of me, the part that had spent years staring into the void, hesitated. It couldn't be real. It had to be fake. Some elaborate, sick performance art piece. Deepfake technology, actors in convincingly grim sets, a twisted ARG, alternate reality game for jaded dark web denizens. That had to be it. The world was full of sick people, but live streaming actual kidnappings for an audience? It seemed too brazen, too risky, even for the darkest corners of the internet. The risk of exposure, the sheer logistical nightmare. No! It was theater. Grotesque, disturbing theater. And a part of me, the part I'm most ashamed of, needed to see. Just to confirm its falseness. To satisfy the morbid itch that had driven me this far. Below the description was the price of admission. A Bitcoin transaction. The amount was surprisingly small, maybe $50 worth. Not insignificant, but low enough to feed my rationalization. Surely, access to something so monstrously real would cost a fortune? This low fee felt like proof of its artificiality. The price of a ticket to an underground horror show. My cursor hovered over the payment link. My breath hitched. This felt different from just reading case files. This was participation, even if passive, even if I believed it was fake. It was crossing a line. But the pull of the unknown, the need to see, was overwhelming. Years of staring at grainy photos, reading redacted police reports, The possibility of seeing something happening, even simulated, was a potent lure. With a trembling finger, I clicked. I navigated the anonymous transaction, sending the cryptocurrency from my sparsely used wallet into the digital ether, addressed to a string of characters that likely offered no real trace. The confirmation screen flashed, payment received. Access granted. A new link appeared on the empty room forum page, interviewing chamber. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. My palms were sweating, slicking the mouse. It's fake, Jake. It's just a sick game. I repeated the mantra silently. I clicked the link. The screen went black for a moment, then resolved into a grainy, low-resolution video feed. The timestamp in the corner indicated it was live. The view was static, seemingly from a camera mounted high in the corner of a small, bare room. Concrete floor, stained walls, no furniture except for a thin mattress in the far corner. The lighting was dim, casting long, distorted shadows. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Just the unsettling quiet, the faint buzz of the audio feed. I could almost convince myself it was just an empty room feed, some bizarre art installation. Then, a shape on the mattress shifted. A figure huddled there, knees drawn to their chest, back to the camera. Long, dark hair obscured any features. They weren't moving much, just a slight tremble that vibrated through the low-quality stream. Actors, I told myself, my throat tightening. Convincing set. Good atmosphere. The figure slowly, agonizingly, turned. As if sensing the unseen eyes watching. As if sensing me. The movement was stiff, pained. The hair fell away from a face pale and gaunt under the dim light, eyes wide with a terror that didn't look staged. It was a face I recognized instantly, not from a movie set, not from some performance art piece. It was the face plastered on news sites, shared frantically on social media, printed on flyers stapled to telephone poles in the next town over for the past 2 weeks. Sarah Jenkins. The girl who vanished walking home from the library. My breath caught in my throat. A cold wave washed over me, so intense I felt nauseous. No! It can't be. Before I could even process the horror, before I could scream or look away or do anything, the feed abruptly cut to black. Then, white text flashed onto the empty screen, stark and brutal against the darkness. You saw. We know. Payment accepted as admission. The black screen felt colder than the rain-streaked window pane beside me. The white text, you saw. We know. Payment accepted as admission. Burned itself onto my retinas. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. Couldn't. My entire world had just tilted on its axis, spun sickeningly, and slammed me against a wall of ice-cold terror. Sarah Jenkins. Not an actor. Not a simulation. Real. Missing. And I had just paid Bitcoin to watch her terrified face live stream from some concrete hellhole. A choked gasp finally broke free, tearing through the silence of my apartment. I slammed the laptop shut with a crack, the sound unnaturally loud. My hands were shaking violently, uncontrollably. I scrambled back from the desk, knocking over the half-empty mug of cold coffee, the brown liquid spreading like a stain across scattered printouts of other missing faces. It felt like sacrilege. They know. The words echoed, not just in my memory, but seemingly in the room itself. They know. Who were they? The operators of that obscene forum? How could they know me? I'd used layers of anonymizing software, routed through servers across the globe, paid with cryptocurrency from a supposedly untraceable wallet. It was supposed to be safe. Anonymous observation. But the message wasn't generic. It was directed. You saw. We know. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I lunged for the power strip under the desk, yanking the cord from the wall, silencing the low hum of the PC tower. The sudden quiet was worse, amplifying the frantic thumping in my chest, the ragged sound of my own breathing. But cutting the power felt laughably inadequate, like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. The connection had already been made. The transaction was logged somewhere in the blockchain's immutable ledger. My payment, my $50 worth of digital cowardice, was my signature on a contract I hadn't read. Admission. What did that mean? Admission to their sick club? Admission of guilt? Admission into something else? Was I now marked, flagged on some hidden list? Were they watching me now? Through my own webcam, its tiny lens suddenly seeming like a malevolent eye staring from the darkened laptop screen? I slapped a piece of duct tape over it, another futile gesture that offered zero comfort. The apartment, usually my sanctuary, my fortress built from case files and caffeine, suddenly felt alien and hostile. Every shadow seemed deeper, elongated, potentially hiding something. The familiar creaks and groans of the old building, sounds I usually tuned out, now snagged on my raw nerves. Was that the floorboards settling in the hallway outside my door? Or footsteps? Slow, deliberate footsteps pausing just outside? I held my breath, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Silence. Just the rain drumming against the glass. But the feeling didn't fade. The distinct, prickling sensation of being watched persisted, crawling over my skin like insects. I checked the locks on my door, the deadbolt, the chain, 3 times. I peered through the peephole into the empty, dimly lit corridor, my eye pressed so hard against the glass it hurt. Nothing. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah Jenkins' face, the hollowed-out look, the stark terror that transcended the grainy feed. And beneath it, the white text, payment accepted as admission. Admission to what? Witnessing? Complicity? Was this my penance? To be haunted by her image, by the knowledge of where she was, unable to do anything? Or was it something more sinister? Was admission the price for becoming the next exhibit in their gallery of horror? The hours crawled by. Dawn eventually broke, painting the gray city skyline in weak, watery colors. The rain had stopped, but the oppressive atmosphere lingered. I felt exposed, vulnerable, even within my own locked apartment. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. My body thrummed with a toxic cocktail of residual caffeine, adrenaline, and pure, undiluted fear. I thought about going to the police. The idea flared brightly for a moment, then died just as quickly. What would I say? Officer, I was browsing a potentially illegal dark web forum, paid in Bitcoin to access what I thought was fake torture porn, but accidentally saw a live feed of that missing girl, Sarah Jenkins. They've locked me up, either as a suspect, an accomplice, or just a lunatic. And worse, what if they knew? The message implied omniscience. We know. Would reporting them trigger something worse? Would it put Sarah in more danger? Would it put me on a fast track to whatever fate awaited those they admitted? The fear paralyzed me. I was trapped between the horror I'd witnessed and the potential horror my admission might unleash. My phone buzzed on the desk where I'd left it. I flinched violently, nearly tripping over the spilled coffee stain. Caller ID, unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. I stared at it, vibrating against the wood, the sound drilling into my skull. Let it go to voicemail? Or answer? What if it was them? What if it wasn't? After maybe the 10th buzz, it stopped. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. No voicemail notification followed. Later that day, driven by a desperate need for some semblance of normalcy, I forced myself to check my email. Junk mail, bills, a newsletter from a cold case blog I'd forgotten I subscribed to. Then I saw it. An email from an address that was just a random string of letters and numbers. No subject line. The body contained only one thing, a single image file attached. My mouse trembled as I hovered over it. Curiosity warred with terror. Don't open it, Jake. Delete it. But the same morbid compulsion that led me to the empty room forced my finger to click. It wasn't a picture of Sarah. It wasn't a threat, not explicitly. It was a photograph, slightly blurry, taken from across the street, looking up towards my apartment building. Towards my window. There was no timestamp, but the lighting suggested it was taken recently. Maybe yesterday evening. Maybe while I was watching the feed. Maybe while the message was burning onto my screen. I scrambled to the window, peering down through the gap in the blinds. The street below looked normal. People walking dogs, cars passing, life going on. But someone had stood down there, aimed a camera up here, and taken that picture. They knew where I lived. The anonymity I'd banked on was a fragile illusion, shattered the moment I sent that Bitcoin. The creaks in the apartment weren't just settling noises anymore. They were potential footsteps. The hiss of the radiator wasn't just steam, it was a whisper. The flicker of a street lamp outside wasn't faulty wiring, it was a signal. Paranoia had sunk its teeth in deep, but this wasn't just paranoia. The email, the photograph, that was proof. They weren't just watching screen names in a dark corner of the web. They were watching me, Jake Riley. Payment accepted as admission. It wasn't just about seeing Sarah. It was about being seen. My $50 hadn't bought me a ticket to watch, it had bought them a ticket to watch me. My morbid curiosity hadn't just led me to witness a nightmare, it had invited the nightmare into my home. The digital world and the physical world had bled together, and I was caught in the terrifying, sticky overlap. That night, as I sat huddled in the dark, listening, the sound came again. Not a creak this time. Something more distinct. A faint scratching noise. Coming from the other side of my apartment door. Soft, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging lightly across the wood. Scratch. 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 It stopped. Then, a single, soft tap, right at the level of the peephole. Time stretched thin and brittle in the silence following the single tap on my peephole. My back was pressed hard against the opposite wall, muscles screaming from tension. Every nerve ending felt frayed, exposed. The scratching had stopped, the tap hadn't repeated, but the presence lingered just beyond the thin wood of the door, heavy and suffocating. Look. Or stay frozen, pretending I hadn't heard, pretending I wasn't home, pretending I wasn't utterly, bone-chillingly terrified. Minutes bled into each other. The silence itself became a kind of torture. Finally, fueled by a desperate need to know, even if knowing was worse, I pushed myself off the wall. My legs felt like lead pipes. I moved with agonizing slowness, each tiny shuffle of my feet echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Reaching the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the peephole cover. Taking a ragged breath, I slid it aside and pressed my eye to the warped glass. Empty. The hallway outside was just as dimly lit, just as vacant as it had been hours before. No shadowy figures, no lingering presence, nothing. Relief washed over me, so potent it left me dizzy, but it was immediately followed by a colder, deeper dread. They had been there. The scratching, the tap, that was real. And now they were gone, which meant they could come and go. The door, the locks, they were irrelevant. I stumbled back, leaning heavily against the door. The cheap would cool against my sweaty forehead. Sleep wasn't just impossible now, it felt like a suicidal act. How could I close my eyes knowing the barrier between my small, terrified world and whatever lurked outside was so permeable? Dawn arrived not with relief, but with exhaustion grinding against raw fear. I forced myself to check the door again, driven by some morbid autopilot. Unlocking the deadbolt, sliding the chain free, the clicks sounded obscenely loud. I opened the door just to crack. Nothing in the hallway. But then I looked down. Lying squarely on my doormat was a small, plain white envelope. No name, no address. My heart hammered against my ribs. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. It was unnervingly light. Inside wasn't a letter, wasn't a threat written in cut-out letters. It was a single photograph, printed on cheap, glossy paper. It was a picture of me, sleeping, taken from inside my bedroom, from the foot of my bed. The angle was low, tilted slightly upwards. The quality was grainy, infused with the dim light filtering through my blinds, but it was undeniably me, oblivious, vulnerable. I dropped the photo as if it burned, scrambling back inside, slamming the door, fumbling with the locks again. They had been inside. While I slept, drugged by exhaustion or perhaps something else, they had been in my room. Standing there, watching, taking pictures. The violation was absolute, stripping away the last vestiges of imagined security. My apartment wasn't a cage, it was a display case. Panic gave way to a frantic, buzzing energy. I had to get out. Now. Forget the police, forget trying to understand. Just run. I threw clothes haphazardly into a backpack, jeans, t-shirts, a toothbrush. My hand shook so badly I could barely zip it closed. Wallet, keys, phone. Where could I go? A motel? Another city? Did it even matter? They found me here. They could find me anywhere. But staying felt like passively waiting for slaughter. My laptop lay dormant on the desk, still adorned with its pathetic piece of duct tape over the webcam. As I moved past it, the screen suddenly flickered to life. I hadn't touched it. The power strip was still disconnected. The screen glowed with the familiar stark black background and white text of the empty room login page. But I wasn't logged in. Then, the login prompt vanished, replaced by the grainy feed I had tried so desperately to forget. Sarah Jenkins. Still there. Still huddled on the mattress. But the camera angle was different now. Whiter. And in the corner of the bleak room, barely visible in the shadows, was something new. A chair. And on the wall behind it, crudely spray-painted letters. Admission Seat J. Riley. My name. In her prison. A designated spot for me? As the next victim? Or as a permanent observer forced to watch? The ambiguity was part of the terror. Then, another window popped up on the screen, overriding the feed. It was small, black, like a command prompt. White text typed itself out, letter by deliberate letter. Accessing local files. Deleting browser history. Pointless. Deleting case files. Sentimental. Activating webcam. The duct tape over the lens suddenly seemed paper thin. Your viewing slot is confirmed. Your fear is noted. Your admission is complete. Welcome to the permanent collection. A final line appeared. Stop trying to leave. I screamed then, a raw, animal sound torn from my throat. I grabbed the backpack and bolted for the door, fumbling with the locks again, my fingers clumsy with terror. Chain off, deadbolt turned. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, ready to sprint for the stairs, for the street, for anywhere but here. I ran right into something solid. Not a person. It felt cold. Metallic. Blocking the hallway just past my door frame was a newly installed security gate, floor to ceiling, thick steel bars gleaming under the dim corridor lights. It hadn't been there an hour ago. It hadn't been there when I checked the peephole. Trapped. The realization hit me with physical force, stealing my breath. They hadn't just been inside my apartment, they controlled the building, the infrastructure around me. My frantic dash for freedom was just another part of the script. Slowly, I backed away from the impassable gate, back towards my open apartment door. The hallway felt miles long. As I reached the threshold, the lights in the corridor flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging everything into near total darkness. From inside my apartment, a faint glow emanated. My laptop screen. It was still on. But the feed wasn't Sarah Jenkins anymore. The pop-up window was gone. The webcam was active. It was broadcasting a live feed of my own terrified face, illuminated only by the screen's glow, reflected back at me from the dark monitor. Beneath the feed, new text appeared, the final caption to my personal horror show. Now showing, Jake Riley. Admission price, paid in full. The scratching sound started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the hallway door. It was coming from inside my apartment. From the closet. From the bathroom. From under the bed. From everywhere at once. My name is Ashley Tent, and for the past 3 years, my life has revolved around the dead. Not in a morbid, gothic sense, mind you. More like an obsessive, analytical, slightly sleep-deprived sense. I'm the voice behind Shadow Trails, a true crime podcast that delves into the cold cases nobody else seems to remember. The forgotten victims, the trails gone icy, the whispers that linger in dusty evidence boxes, that's my beat. It started as a passion project, fueled by late nights, too much coffee, and an insatiable curiosity about the darker threads woven into the fabric of everyday life. Now, somehow, it was actually gaining traction. Listener numbers were climbing steadily, comment sections buzzed with theories and shared frustrations, and I'd even landed a small sponsorship deal with a local coffee roaster, fitting, considering my caffeine intake. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom overlooking a perpetually damp alleyway in Portland, Oregon, doubled as my recording studio and research hub. One wall was dominated by corkboards plastered with maps, timelines, suspect photos gleaned from grainy newspaper archives, and scribbled notes connected by webs of red yarn that probably made me look halfway to crazy. The air usually smelled faintly of old paper, lukewarm coffee, and the ozone tang of overworked electronics. My microphone sat perched on its stand like a silent sentinel on my cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of books on forensics, criminal psychology, and local history. This was my sanctuary, my command center, the place where I tried to piece together fragmented narratives of lives violently interrupted. I specialize in the cases that have fallen through the cracks, the ones deemed unsolvable or simply uninteresting by mainstream media cycles. The Jane Doe found by the Willamette River in '87, the missing hiker in the Mount Hood National Forest whose backpack turned up miles away years later, the string of unsolved arsons in the historic district during the early 2000s. Each case was a puzzle box, and I felt a strange, compelling obligation to keep rattling it, hoping something new might fall out. Shadow Trails wasn't just about recounting facts. It was about trying to understand the why, to give voice to the silence, and maybe, just maybe, spark a memory or connection that could lead to a breakthrough. It felt important, even vital, despite the toll it took, the sleepless nights spent chasing theories down digital rabbit holes, the emotional weight of immersing myself in tragedy day after day. The email arrived on a Tuesday night, or rather, early Wednesday morning. Rain lashed against my window, mimicking the static hiss in my headphones as I edited audio from an interview with a retired detective. It was 2:17 a.m. The notification pinged softly, an unobtrusive sound that normally wouldn't have registered over the storm and my own focused work. But the sender address caught my eye immediately. It wasn't a name or a standard email provider. It was a long, alphanumeric string followed by an obscure domain I'd never encountered, the kind associated with encrypted, temporary services designed for anonymity. The subject line was stark, just 2 words, for Shadow Trails. A prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. I dealt with strange messages sometimes, obsessive fans, armchair detectives with outlandish theories, even the occasional thinly veiled threat from someone who didn't like me digging into a particular local cold case. But this felt different. Colder. More deliberate. Hesitantly, I clicked it open. The message was brief, devoid of pleasantries. Ashley Tent, your podcast seeks shadows. We know where some truly dark ones reside. There is a marketplace on the dark web, accessible only via Tor. It is called Morbidity Lane. They trade in the unthinkable, mementos, trophies, harvested from victims of crimes the surface world has forgotten. Items linked to cases you profile. Specifically, look for sellers connected to the highway phantom. He's been quiet, but his legacy festers there. Perhaps you can find something illuminating. Consider this a professional courtesy. Or a warning. A concerned observer. My blood ran cold. Morbidity Lane. The name itself was grotesque, visceral. The dark web wasn't an area I frequented. I knew of it, of course, the hidden corners of the internet accessible only through specialized browsers like Tor, notorious for hosting black markets selling drugs, weapons, hacked data, and worse. Far worse, apparently. The idea of a marketplace specifically for murderabilia, for trophies taken from victims? It was sickening. It felt like a violation on a level I hadn't even contemplated. And the highway phantom. My breath hitched. That was a name that sent a genuine chill through anyone familiar with Pacific Northwest crime history. A phantom indeed. Active in the late 90s, suspected in at least 5 disappearances and murders along Interstate 5, stretching from southern Oregon up towards the Washington border. His victims were often stranded motorists, people who vanished after their cars broke down. He left no witnesses, minimal forensic evidence, just a terrifying void. Then, as abruptly as he started, he stopped. The case went cold, archived but never forgotten, a bogeyman lingering in the region's collective memory. Inactive for nearly 2 decades. And this email claimed relics from his crimes were being sold online? My first instinct was revulsion, a visceral urge to delete the email, scrub my inbox, maybe even bleach my computer screen. This was wading into waters far deeper and murkier than dusty archives and old police reports. Accessing the dark web carried risks, malware, scams, exposure to illegal and deeply disturbing content, and potentially attracting the wrong kind of attention. The anonymous sender, the cryptic warning, it all screamed danger. But then, the podcaster in me, the obsessive puzzle solver, kicked in. Trophies. Evidence. Linked to the highway phantom. A case that had haunted investigators and armchair sleuths for years. What if this morbidity lane was real? What if items listed there could provide a new lead, a clue overlooked, something to break the case wide open? The thought was intoxicating, a siren song pulling me towards the treacherous digital rocks. This wasn't just a story, it was potentially the story, a chance to uncover something monstrous and maybe, just maybe, bring a measure of closure or justice. My better judgment, as the cliche goes, was screaming at me to walk away. Run, even. Call the police, maybe? But what would I tell them? I got an anonymous email about a spooky dark website possibly linked to a 20-year-old cold case. They'd likely dismiss it as a hoax, a prank aimed at the local true crime podcaster. They couldn't investigate based on something so flimsy, so potentially fabricated. And the dark web, navigating that required specific tools and a willingness to step outside legal and ethical boundaries that law enforcement couldn't easily cross without probable cause. No, if anyone was going to look into this, it would have to be someone like me. Someone operating in the gray areas, driven by a need to know, willing to take risks for the sake of the story, for the sake of the shadows. The email was a lure, expertly cast. It played on my professional curiosity, my inherent desire to uncover hidden truths, and the specific nature of my work. He's been quiet, but his legacy festers there. That line echoed in my mind. Festers. Like a wound that never healed. I sat there for a long time, the rain drumming a relentless rhythm against the glass, the cursor blinking on my screen. The lure of Morbidity Lane, the horror of its alleged existence, and the ghost of the highway phantom wrestled within me. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, the darkness below whispering promises of terrible knowledge. Against my better judgment? That phrase barely scratched the surface. This felt fundamentally unwise, reckless, potentially catastrophic. Yet, the thought of those trophies, those stolen pieces of lives cut short, possibly sitting on some hidden server waiting to be bought, it gnawed at me. The possibility, however remote, that I could find something real, something that mattered, outweighed the fear. Or perhaps the fear was part of the draw. I minimized my editing software. Opened a fresh browser window. My fingers, trembling slightly, typed Tor browser download into the search bar. The first step onto a path I knew, deep down, I shouldn't be taking. The shadows were calling, and against all reason, I was preparing to answer. Installing Tor felt like putting on a disguise I couldn't see. The familiar interface of the internet melted away, replaced by something slower, clunkier, deliberately opaque. Each click felt like wading through digital molasses, the layered encryption routing my connection through a labyrinth of anonymous servers across the globe. The addresses weren't neat .coms or .orgs, but chaotic strings of letters and numbers ending in .onion. It felt less like browse and more like fumbling in the dark, guided only by the cryptic directions from that anonymous email. I'd secured a throwaway laptop for this, one bought cash only from a pawn shop, wiped clean, and running a privacy-focused OS from a USB stick. Paranoia was already my co-pilot. Finding Morbidity Lane wasn't straightforward. The email hadn't provided a direct link, just the name and the context. It took hours of navigating shadowy forums and directories referenced in hushed tones in certain true crime subcultures, places I usually avoided, before I found a verified entry point. Each click deeper felt like another step down into a basement I instinctively knew I shouldn't enter. Finally, after inputting a complex onion address and solving a CAPTCHA that seemed designed by a particularly cynical robot, the page loaded. Morbidity Lane. The name sprawled across the top in a stark, blocky font against a charcoal gray background. There were no graphics, no flashy ads, just text and hyperlinks, disturbingly utilitarian. It looked like a relic from the early days of the web, stripped bare of anything but its grim purpose. Categories lined the left sidebar: personal effects, case files, unofficial, crime scene remnants, trophies by designation. Below that, specific, notorious cases or killers were listed, almost like brand names. Bundy, Gacy, Ramirez. And there, near the bottom, chillingly understated, Highway Phantom. My stomach churned. Clicking on any category felt like endorsing the horror, participating just by looking. I scrolled past listings with titles that made bile rise in my throat, a stained piece of fabric listed under souvenir, a collection of Polaroids described simply as last moments, tools cataloged with cold precision. The sellers had anonymous handles, alphanumeric strings or grim pseudonyms like Collector Omega or Silent Witness. Transactions were exclusively in Bitcoin or Monero, facilitated through the site's escrow system, lending a terrifying veneer of professionalism to the grotesque commerce. This wasn't just rumor, it was real. A functioning marketplace for the relics of human suffering. Steeling myself, I clicked on the Highway Phantom link. The page refreshed, displaying only a handful of items. Compared to the more prolific and infamous killers, his section was sparse, reflecting his abrupt disappearance from the public eye and, perhaps, the tight grip he kept on whatever twisted mementos he collected. There were grainy, scanned photos of locations related to the disappearances, ambiguously labeled. There was a listing for a single, rusty key described as Vehicle Access Victim 2. And then there was the locket. Phantom's Keepsake number 3 silver locket. The listing photo was low resolution, showing a simple, oval-shaped silver locket, heavily tarnished, lying on a dark, neutral surface. The description was minimal. Vintage silver locket, tarnished. Clasp functional. Contains small personal effect, believed connected to phantom activity, Oregon sector, late 90s. Sold as is. Vendor, roadside finds. The price was listed as 0.45 BTC. At the current exchange rate, that was several $1,000s. Not an insignificant sum, especially for a podcaster running on coffee sponsorships and passion. My heart hammered against my ribs. Contains small personal effect. What did that mean? A lock of hair? A photograph? Something worse? Roadside finds. The name conjured images of items discarded or discovered along lonely highways, the Phantom's presumed hunting grounds. Was this vendor the Phantom himself, quietly liquidating his collection? Or a ghoul who somehow acquired these items later? The ambiguity was terrifying. Buying it felt insane. It was handing over a substantial amount of cryptocurrency into the anonymous void of the dark web for an item of dubious origin, potentially funding God knows what kind of criminal activity, all based on an anonymous tip and a desperate hope. It was evidence, possibly, but purchasing it felt like participating in the desecration. Yet, the Highway Phantom. The case was a gaping wound in the region's history. This locket, if genuine, was a tangible link to that darkness, something that had potentially been held by the killer, or belonged to a victim. It was a physical piece of the puzzle I'd only ever been able to examine through faded documents and second-hand accounts. What if that small personal effect was the key? What if it held DNA, an inscription, something that could identify a victim or point towards the Phantom himself? The potential, however slim, was a powerful narcotic. Shadow Trails needed this. I needed this. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a predetermined step on a path laid out by that first email. I activated the burner cryptocurrency wallet I'd painstakingly set up, funded through a convoluted series of tumblers and exchanges designed to obfuscate the origin of the funds. I initiated the purchase through Morbidity Lane's escrow, providing the address of a private mailbox I'd rented under a slightly altered version of my name, another layer of flimsy protection. Hitting confirm transaction felt like jumping off the cliff I'd been standing on. The Bitcoin vanished from my wallet into the site's holding account. A small notification appeared, payment received. Awaiting shipment confirmation from Roadside Finds. Then came the wait. And the paranoia bloomed like toxic mold. Every creak of my apartment building, every unfamiliar car parked on the street outside, every notification ping on my phone sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I stopped recording new podcast episodes, unable to focus, my thoughts consumed by the transaction and its potential fallout. Was roadside finds just a scammer who would take the crypto and vanish? Or worse, was the listing bait? Was someone monitoring the buyers? Had I just flagged myself to the phantom himself, or to someone equally dangerous who now had a way to trace the package? Sleep offered little respite, filled with disjointed nightmares of dark highways, tarnished silver, and the cold, anonymous interface of Morbidity Lane. I checked the private mailbox daily, my stomach twisting with a knot of dread and anticipation each time I unlocked the small metal door. For 10 agonizing days, it was empty. I started to believe I'd been scammed, or perhaps that was the best case scenario. On the 11th day, it was there. A small, plain brown padded envelope. No return address. Just my assumed name and the P.O. box number typed on a cheap label. The postmark was smudged but looked like it originated from somewhere in Northern California. It felt unnervingly light, yet dense, in my hand. I clutched it tightly all the way back to my apartment, constantly looking over my shoulder, the sense of being watched more intense than ever. Inside my sanctuary, now feeling more like a cage, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and sat at my cluttered desk. My hands trembled as I carefully sliced open the envelope with a box cutter. Inside, nestled in a small Ziploc bag, was the locket. It looked exactly like the low-resolution photo online, dull, tarnished silver, maybe an inch long, simple and unadorned except for a faint floral etching on the front, almost obscured by time and neglect. It felt cold to the touch, unnaturally so. The weight was heavier than I expected, solid and real. A tangible piece of darkness, bought and paid for. My breath hitched. This was it. The culmination of the anonymous tip, the risky dark web excursion, the financial gamble, the gnawing paranoia. With trembling fingers, I worked the tiny clasp. It was stiff, resisting slightly, then popped open. I peered inside, expecting. I don't know what. A faded miniature photograph? A lock of hair tied with ribbon? Engraved initials? Instead, the two halves of the locket were empty, just dull, slightly scratched silver interiors. My heart sank with disappointment, quickly followed by a surge of anger. Was this it? A worthless piece of junk? Had I risked everything for an empty, tarnished trinket? But then, as I tilted it under the desk lamp, something caught the light. It wasn't a reflection of the metal. Tucked deep into the hinge side curve of one half, almost perfectly camouflaged, was something tiny. Not an effect in the way I'd imagined. Not organic. It was small, black, rectangular. Metallic contact points glinted faintly. It took me a moment to comprehend. It wasn't a picture, or hair, or an inscription. Wedged tightly inside this relic from a decades-old cold case was a micro SD card. A tiny, almost invisible piece of modern technology hidden within the antiquated shell. The implications crashed over me, colder and more terrifying than the locket itself. This wasn't just a memento. It was data. And someone, roadside finds for the phantom or the concerned observer, wanted me to find it. The question was, what information did it hold? And why was it hidden here? The true horror, I suspected, was only just beginning. The micro SD card lay in my palm, a tiny black rectangle that felt utterly alien nestled within the tarnished silver of the locket. It was impossibly small, A speck of modern data storage incongruously hidden within an artifact supposedly tied to a killer who haunted the highways decades ago. Confusion warred with a rising tide of dread. Why? The highway phantoms era predated the widespread use of such technology for personal data. Was the locket a fake, a modern fabrication designed to lure me? Or was the locket genuine, but the chip added later? By whom? Roadside finds? The anonymous emailer? The purpose felt sickeningly deliberate. This wasn't a random inclusion. It was the reason the locket was listed, the small personal effect mentioned so ambiguously. Not a relic of the past, but a message for the present. A message delivered through a channel steeped in death and anonymity. My hands were shaking again, not just from fear, but from a chilling sense of manipulation. I'd been led, step by step, from that first email to this moment, holding this tiny, loaded object. There was no question of not reading it. Whatever game was being played, I was already on the board, and this chip was the opponent's next move. But caution screamed louder than curiosity now. This could be anything, a virus designed to wipe my systems, spyware, ransomware, or worse. I disconnected the burner laptop from my already secured Wi-Fi network, ensuring it was completely air-gapped. Only then did I retrieve the cheap USB multi-card reader I kept for transferring audio files. My breath hitched as I carefully slid the minuscule microSD card into the corresponding slot. It clicked faintly into place. I plugged the reader into the laptop's USB port. The machine worked for a second, then a small notification popped up, a new drive detected. I ran a portable antivirus scan on the drive first. Nothing. Clean. That was somehow more unsettling than finding an obvious threat. It meant the payload wasn't malware, it was the information itself. Opening the File Explorer, the drive appeared, labeled simply as USB Drive E. Clicking on it revealed its contents. My blood ran cold. It wasn't filled with files, documents, or photos. There was only one file. Stark. Alone. It wasn't even named descriptively. It was just payload.txt. A standard text file, barely a kilobyte in size. My heart felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. This was it. The illumination the email had promised. I double-clicked. Notepad opened instantly, displaying the file's contents. It was just 2 lines of text. The first line was a string of numbers separated by a comma and a space, marked by degree symbols and negative signs. 45.xxxxxx degree, -122.xxxxxx degree. I'm obscuring the exact numbers here, but I recognized them instantly. The second line was even simpler, April 2nd, 2025. I stared at the screen, numbness spreading through me. GPS coordinates. Cold, precise, numerical coordinates. I knew the approximate range for Portland, the -122 longitude unmistakable. Without conscious thought, driven by a horrifying, dawning certainty, I grabbed my personal smartphone, momentarily abandoning all my careful digital security protocols, and manually typed the coordinates into a map application. The map zoomed in, centering first on the Pacific Northwest, then Oregon, then Portland. It zeroed in further, past neighborhood levels, down to street level. The red pin landed. Not on a highway rest stop. Not on a remote forest location tied to the phantom. Not on a police station or a public landmark. It landed squarely on my apartment building. More specifically, it landed with chilling accuracy right where I was sitting. My desk. My command center. My sanctuary. Then my eyes flickered back to the burner laptop screen, to the second line of text. April 2nd, 2025. I glanced at the clock display on my phone. It was 3:48 a.m. on April 1st. The date on the chip was for tomorrow. Less than 20 hours away. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The anonymous email, the carefully chosen lure of the highway phantom, the grotesque theater of Morbidity Lane, the specific listing from roadside finds, the tarnished locket, none of it was about solving a cold case. It was never about the phantom's legacy festering online. It was a delivery system. Sophisticated. Calculated. Terrifyingly personal. Someone wanted me to have these coordinates and this date. Someone knew enough about me, about my podcast shadow trails, about my obsessions, to craft the perfect bait. Someone had orchestrated this entire sequence, guiding me through the dark web's treacherous paths, making me pay for the privilege of receiving their message. And the message was clear. I know where you live. And I'm coming. Or perhaps something is coming for you. The air in my small apartment suddenly felt thick, suffocating. The familiar clutter of my research boards, the microphone, the stacks of books, they no longer felt like tools of my trade, but like props on a stage set for my demise. My home, my safe space, was compromised, pinpointed on a digital map held by an unknown entity with malicious intent tied to a specific, rapidly approaching date. Who? Was it the highway phantom, somehow still active, technologically savvy, playing games with the podcaster digging into his past? Was it roadside finds, using the phantom's notoriety as a cover? Was it the concerned observer who sent the email, their concern a predatory lie? Or was it someone else entirely, someone drawn by my podcast's growing reach, someone from the shadows I profiled? The questions hammered at me, but they were drowned out by raw, primal fear. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. My skin prickled, every nerve ending alight with the certainty of being watched. I jumped at the sound of the refrigerator compressor kicking on. The rain outside wasn't just weather anymore, it was a shroud, masking potential movements, sounds. I scrambled to the door, heart pounding, fumbling with the deadbolt, checking the chain. It felt laughably inadequate. I peered through the peephole into the empty, dimly lit hallway. Nothing. Then I rushed to the window overlooking the alley, pulling the blinds slightly aside. Just slick pavement, overflowing dumpsters, darkness. But the feeling of unseen eyes lingered, crawling over my skin. Tomorrow. April 2nd. They knew where I was, and they had set an appointment. The locket felt like a lead weight in my hand now, no longer a clue but a harbinger. The tiny chip it carried wasn't just data, it was a countdown. My gaze fell on the clock on my laptop screen. 3:52 a.m. The hours until April 2nd began to tick away, each second echoing like a footstep drawing nearer in the dark. I was trapped in the beam of a digital spotlight, and the hunter, whoever they were, knew exactly where to find me. The final shadow on the trail wasn't from a cold case. It was my own. And it was rapidly closing in. Folks call me Ben Carter. Just Ben, usually. Sounds straightforward enough, right? Like the kind of guy who manages a mid-level department at some paper-pushing company, maybe coaches Little League on the weekends, complains about property taxes. And honestly, that wasn't too far off the mark. My life, up until recently, was aggressively, almost offensively, mundane. I lived in a beige house on a street lined with other beige houses, drove a sensible sedan, and my biggest thrill was finding my preferred brand of coffee beans on sale. Excitement was a foreign concept, a splash of color I only read about. Maybe that's why I started down this path. The novel. That's what I told myself, anyway. A gritty crime novel, I called it, trying to inject some testosterone into the description. I wanted authenticity, the kind of raw detail that made readers flinch. I pictured myself hunched over a typewriter like some old-school Moore detective, pounding out truths about the dark underbelly of society. The reality was me, hunched over a laptop in my spare bedroom, surrounded by lukewarm coffee and self-doubt. My chosen subject? Cartel operations. Why? I don't know. It sounded dangerous, exotic, the furthest possible thing from my beige existence. Research started innocently enough, documentaries, news articles, academic papers. But it all felt sanitized, filtered. I wasn't getting the feel of it, the language, the mindset. I needed something raw, unfiltered. And that's when I made the leap, the kind of stupid, impulsive decision born out of boredom and a misplaced sense of artistic integrity. I downloaded TOR, the dark web. Even saying it felt illicit, like whispering a forbidden word. Setting it up was easier than I expected, which was vaguely disappointing. I'd pictured complicated code, back-alley digital handshakes. Instead, it was just a browser. Slower, clunkier, but fundamentally the same. Finding the places I was looking for, however, that took some digging. Forums and chat rooms hidden behind cryptic URLs, places where anonymity wasn't just a feature, it was the entire point. At first, it was terrifyingly fascinating. Like pressing your face against the glass of a piranha tank. Conversations flickered past in coded language, slang I barely understood, discussing transactions and movements that made my stomach clench. Violence was spoken of casually, like discussing the weather. Death was a business expense. I told myself I was an anthropologist, an objective observer studying a strange and dangerous tribe. I was just there to learn the lingo, to absorb the atmosphere for my novel. I started small, lurking, reading, absorbing. I picked up some of the slang, learned the subtle ways they tested newcomers. I created a rudimentary profile, something vague and non-committal. I never posted much, just watched. But the longer I stayed, the bolder I got. Or maybe just more reckless. I started asking tentative questions, phrasing them carefully, trying to sound like I knew more than I did. Looking back, it was like a child playing dress-up in his father's military uniform. I looked the part, vaguely, but anyone with real experience would see through it instantly. Or so I thought. There was one particular group, focused on cross-border logistics. Smuggling, essentially. Not just drugs, but weapons, people, anything that needed to move unseen. Their conversations were clipped, professional, chillingly efficient. I'd been monitoring them for a couple of weeks, trying to piece together their methods for a chapter in my book. I made a comment one night, something innocuous, I thought, about the difficulty of securing reliable transport on short notice. It was meant to sound like an informed observation, part of the background chatter. The private message arrived almost instantly. It wasn't flashy, no menacing skull emojis or threats. It was simple, direct. From a user I recognized as a frequent, respected poster in the logistics channel. Got a potential logistics task. Short notice. Requires discretion. Interested? My blood ran cold. This wasn't research anymore. This wasn't observation. This was contact. Real contact. They thought I was one of them. They thought my pathetic attempt at fitting in, my carefully crafted question, was a signal. A signal that I was available, capable, willing. Panic seized me. Pure, unadulterated terror. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Logistics task. Discretion. Cartel operations. The words echoed in my head, swirling with images from the documentaries, the news reports, disappearances, brutal violence, inescapable consequences. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I slammed the laptop shut, the click echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet room. But that wasn't enough. The connection was still open. They were waiting. Could they trace me? TR was supposed to be anonymous, but these weren't script kiddies playing games. These were professionals. What if they had ways? I fumbled with the power cord, yanking it from the wall. Then, scrambling under the desk, I disconnected the Ethernet cable, physically severing the link to the outside world. My breathing was ragged, shallow gasps. I stood there, in the sudden silence of my spare bedroom, staring at the dead laptop, the dangling cables. It took me almost an hour to calm down enough to think semi-rationally. Delete everything. That was the only thought. I powered the laptop back on, my fingers fumbling. I uninstalled TR, ran every disk cleaner I had, wiped the browser history, deleted temporary files, even scrubbed the registry using a tool I barely understood. I felt like I was trying to scrub a stain out of my soul. Every click felt too loud, everywhere of the hard drive a potential alarm bell. When it was done, I felt drained. But also, a fragile sense of relief began to creep in. It was just the internet, right? Anonymous users in a hidden corner of the web. They didn't know my real name, my location. I hadn't given them anything concrete. It was a misunderstanding, a close call. I'd panicked, sure, but I'd cut the cord. I was safe back in my beige house, my beige life. The gritty novel suddenly seemed like the stupidest idea I'd ever had. I just wanted to forget the whole thing, go back to worrying about coffee bean sales. I slept badly that night, dreams filled with flickering text and shadowy figures. But morning came, bright and ordinary. The sun streamed through the kitchen window as I made coffee, the familiar routine a comforting balm. It was just a stupid online scare, I told myself, sipping the hot liquid. A reminder to stay in my lane. Then, I glanced out the window towards my driveway and froze. There was a car parked there. Not my sensible sedan. This was an older model, maybe a dark blue or black Honda Accord, but it was hard to tell under the grime and damage. One headlight was smashed, hanging loose. There were deep, ugly dents along the passenger side, scrapes down to the bare metal. The rear passenger window was completely shattered, leaving a gaping hole. It wasn't just the damage that held me rooted to the spot. It was the wrongness of it. It was parked squarely in my driveway, angled slightly as if parked in a hurry. Nobody I knew drove a car like that. No neighbor would just leave a wrecked vehicle on my property. My coffee cup slipped from numb fingers, shattering on the tile floor, the sound deafening in the sudden, terrifying silence. I stumbled towards the front door, heart pounding not with panic this time, but with a cold, creeping dread that was infinitely worse. I pushed the door open slowly, peering out. The street was quiet, empty. Just the damaged car sitting there, an alien object violating the mundane normality of my suburban morning. My eyes scanned the vehicle, taking in the shattered glass sprinkled across the asphalt, the deep scrape on the bumper. Then, my gaze drifted down towards my doormat. Tucked neatly underneath the edge, almost hidden, glinted a small object. Keys. A single car key on a plain metal ring. Waiting. My breath hitched. The private message flashed back into my mind. Logistics task. Short notice. Requires discretion. Dispose of a vehicle, no questions asked. The dark stain soaking through the upholstery of the back seat, visible even from my doorway through the shattered window, suddenly seemed infinitely darker, infinitely more sinister. The internet hadn't stayed behind the screen. It had followed me home. And it had parked in my driveway. The world tilted. The cheerful morning sun suddenly felt accusatory, highlighting the horror parked brazenly in my driveway. My legs felt like lead weights, but somehow I stumbled backward, away from the door, away from the car, away from the glinting keys under the mat. I slammed the door shut, the flimsy lock clicking into place, a laughable defense against whatever force had delivered this nightmare to my doorstep. My back slid down the door frame until I was slumped on the floor, the shattered coffee cup and spreading pool of lukewarm liquid forgotten beside me. Breathe. I had to breathe. But the air felt thick, heavy, refusing to fill my lungs properly. My mind raced, a chaotic whirlwind of fear and disbelief. The dark web chat room. The casual offer. Logistics task. Dispose of a vehicle. No questions asked. It wasn't just text on a screen anymore. It was dense and shattered glass and a sickeningly dark stain just yards away. And the keys. Oh God, the keys. They were the final, terrifying confirmation. A delivery confirmation. Your nightmare has arrived. How long did I sit there? Minutes? An hour? Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. The silence of the house pressed in, amplifying the frantic thumping in my chest. Outside, the world continued. A distant lawnmower started up, birds chirped, a car drove past down the street. Normal sounds that felt utterly alien, broadcast from a different reality than the one I was suddenly trapped in. The keys. They couldn't stay there. Leaving them under the mat felt like negligence. Like failing the first test. What if a neighbor saw them? What if some kid found them? More importantly, What if they were watching, judging my inaction? The thought spurred me into motion. My legs shaky, I pushed myself up, unlocked the door with trembling fingers, and opened it just a crack. The car sat there, patient, menacing. The keys glinted innocently. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I darted out, snatched them up, and retreated back into the house, locking the door again immediately. The key ring felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, cold metal imbued with unspoken responsibility. It wasn't just a key, it was a burden, a physical manifestation of the choice that had been made for me. Holding the key felt like crossing a threshold. Before, I was a terrified observer. Now I was implicated. I was holding the means to interact with the evidence. I needed to see it up close. I dreaded it, but I knew I had to. Delaying felt dangerous. Knowledge, even horrifying knowledge, felt marginally better than blind panic. Peeking through the living room blinds, I scanned the street. Quiet. Empty. Taking another unsteady breath, I slipped out the front door, leaving it slightly ajar, and forced myself to walk towards the car. Each step felt like wading through cement. My eyes darted left and right, scanning windows, parked cars, the trees lining the street. Was that a curtain twitching? Was that car idling down the block moving unusually slowly? Paranoia wrapped around me like a shroud. Every shadow seemed to hold a watcher. Up close, the car was even worse. The dents were deep, suggesting a significant impact. The shattered rear window wasn't just broken, it looked like it had imploded inward. Shards of safety glass glittered on the asphalt and across the back seat. And the stain. I leaned closer, peering through the jagged opening, ignoring the sharp edges of the remaining glass. It was dark, almost black in the center, fading to a reddish-brown near the edges where it had soaked deep into the cheap fabric upholstery. It covered a significant portion of the seat and dripped down onto the floor mat below. There was a smell, too, underneath the dust and neglect, a faint, coppery tang mixed with something stale and vaguely chemical, like a failed attempt to clean it up. It smelled like old blood. My stomach churned, and I had to physically turn away, gagging. My gaze swept the interior. Empty fast food wrappers littered the passenger floor. An old air freshener shaped like a pine tree dangled limply from the rearview mirror, utterly failing its purpose. Nothing obviously personal, no wallet or phone left behind. Just the grim aftermath. I tried the driver's door. Locked. Passenger door? Locked. The back doors were presumably locked too. The one was missing its window. What about the trunk? Did I dare look? The thought of finding something, or someone, back there sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I couldn't. Not yet. Retreating back into the house felt like reaching a fragile sanctuary. I locked the door, drew the curtains tight, shutting out the sight of the car but trapping myself with the knowledge of it. What were my options? The obvious one screamed in my mind: call the police. Report a suspicious, damaged vehicle abandoned in my driveway. Anonymous tip, maybe? But the cold dread that followed that thought was paralyzing. They found me. They knew my house. These weren't petty thugs. They were part of a cartel, an organization with reach and resources I couldn't begin to fathom. If they could track me down from a fleeting, anonymous interaction on the dark web, What couldn't they do? Calling the police felt like signing my own death warrant. They'd know. They'd see it as betrayal, as breaking the implicit agreement sealed by the delivery of the keys. No questions asked likely applied to me as much as it did to them. And what would I tell the police anyway? That I was researching cartels on the dark web and accidentally got offered a job disposing of what looked like a crime scene vehicle? I'd be the prime suspect. My gritty novel excuse would crumble under the first hint of scrutiny. Option 2, do nothing. Pretend it isn't there. Hope they come back for it, or hope it just disappears. But that felt equally impossible. The car was a glaring beacon on my suburban street. Neighbors would notice. Questions would be asked. And more terrifyingly, they clearly expected me to handle it. The keys weren't a suggestion, they were an instruction. Doing nothing felt like deliberate defiance, and I had no doubt they were monitoring me, waiting for me to fulfill my logistics task. How long would they wait before taking corrective action? The possibilities made my skin crawl. Option 3, comply. Take the keys, get in the car, drive it somewhere, anywhere, and get rid of it. Sink it in a lake. Abandon it in a bad neighborhood. Set it on fire. My mind, the one that dreamed of writing gritty fiction, suddenly felt woefully inadequate for the reality of actual crime. I didn't know how to dispose of a car, let alone one that potentially contained evidence of horrific violence. And the risks, getting caught by police during the act, leaving my own fingerprints or DNA, screwing it up somehow and making things even worse with the cartel. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the sky. I paced the confines of my living room, a prisoner in my own beige house. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, every passing car sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I peeked through the blinds countless times, half expecting to see shadowy figures watching the house, half terrified that I actually would. Once, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, getting her mail. She glanced towards my driveway, her brow furrowing slightly at the sight of the unfamiliar wreck. She looked towards my house, and I ducked back behind the curtain, my heart pounding. Did she see me? Would she call someone? The digital clock on the cable box seemed to mock me, each minute dripping away like water torture. 1:17 p.m. 3:42 p.m. 5:09 p.m. Dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the lawn. The car looked even more sinister in the fading light. Darkness wouldn't hide it, it would just make my task, if I chose to accept it, infinitely more terrifying. I couldn't run. Where would I go? They knew my home address. Finding me again wouldn't be difficult. I had no real money saved, no connections, no skills that would help me disappear. Running felt like delaying the inevitable, and likely making it worse. There was no choice. Not really. Fear of the police was potent, but fear of the cartel, of the unseen watchers who had breached the digital wall and entered my physical life, was absolute. They had shown their reach. They had given me a task. The consequences of failure were unthinkable. As darkness finally consumed the street, broken only by the intermittent glow of streetlights, a grim resolve began to settle in my stomach, heavy and cold as the key still clutched in my sweaty palm. I couldn't write my way out of this. I couldn't research my way out. I had stumbled into the underbelly, and the only way out was through. Taking a deep, shaky breath that tasted like dust and despair, I walked back to the front door. My hand hesitated on the knob. Outside, the wrecked car sat waiting under the sickly orange glow of the streetlight. It looked like a patient predator. I opened the door, the cool night air hitting my face. The street was silent again. Holding the key tightly, I stepped outside and walked towards the driver's side door. Time to see if it would even start. The sound of the key sliding into the ignition lock felt deafeningly loud, a final, irrevocable click. The key turned. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only a click, a horrible electronic whirring sound that seemed to scream into the night. Failure. They'd given me a dead car. Panic flared, hot and sharp. But then, with a strangled cough and a shudder that vibrated through the steering wheel into my trembling hands, the engine caught. It settled into a rough, unhealthy-sounding idle, loud enough, I was certain, to wake the dead, or at least Mrs. Gable. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, illuminating a cracked speedometer, dust motes dancing in the faint glow, and offering just enough light to catch the dark, ragged edge of the stain on the back seat in the rearview mirror. Bile rose in my throat. Don't think. Just drive. My hands felt slick on the wheel. I fumbled the gear stick into drive, the transmission clunking in protest. Easing off the brake, I checked the mirrors, empty street, dark houses, and pulled away from the curb. Leaving my driveway, leaving the fragile illusion of my normal life behind, felt like stepping off a cliff. The car handled terribly, pulling hard to the right where the dents were deepest, the frame likely bent. The wind howled through the shattered rear window, carrying the cold night air and the faint, persistent metallic tang from the back seat. Every rattle, every groan of the abused chassis sounded like an accusation. I drove like a ghost, sticking to side streets, avoiding the brighter main roads. My eyes constantly flicked to the rearview mirror, not just for police, but for them. Headlights appearing behind me sent jolts of pure terror through my system, my knuckles whitening on the wheel, bracing for the inevitable confrontation. But each time, the car would eventually turn off, just a normal person heading home, oblivious to the rolling crime scene I was piloting through the quiet suburban night. Or were they oblivious? Was that driver watching me? Did they notice the shattered window, the ragged dents? Paranoia was my co-pilot now, whispering doubts and fears in my ear. Where was I going? A half-forgotten memory surfaced, an old quarry, miles out of town, abandoned decades ago after it flooded. People used to dump junk there, sometimes stolen cars, according to local lore whispered in high school. It was remote, deep, and dark. Perfect. Or as perfect as any option could be in this waking nightmare. I navigated by instinct and fragmented memories, heading towards the outskirts of town, then onto older, poorly maintained county roads. The streetlights disappeared, plunging the car into near-total darkness, broken only by the weak, flickering headlights cutting a shaky path through the trees lining the road. The turnoff was barely visible, an overgrown dirt track disappearing into the woods. The car scraped against low-hanging branches, the rough track jarring my teeth. Twice the wheels spun in loose gravel, threatening to strand me, but somehow the abused engine kept pulling. Finally, the trees opened up, and I saw it, a vast expanse of still, black water reflecting the sliver of moon overhead, surrounded by sheer rock faces. The silence here was profound, broken only by the ragged idle of the car and the frantic pounding of my own heart. This was it. The end of the line for this cursed vehicle. I drove as close to the edge as I dared, the headlights illuminating the dark, depthless water just feet away. I put the car in neutral, yanked the emergency brake, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing heavily, the smell of blood seeming stronger than ever in the enclosed space. Then, frantic energy took over. Get out. Get rid of it. I wiped the steering wheel, the gear stick, the door handle frantically with my sleeve, a pathetic, useless gesture. I knew. I hadn't worn gloves. My prints, my DNA, were likely all over this thing. I scrambled out, leaving the driver's door open. Reaching back in, I released the emergency brake. The car didn't move. The incline wasn't steep enough right here. Panic surged. I couldn't leave it sitting here on the edge. Putting my shoulder against the rear pillar on the driver's side, away from the shattered window, I pushed. The car groaned, resisted. I pushed harder, straining, adrenaline flooding my system. It shifted just an inch. I pushed again, digging my feet into the loose dirt. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to roll. Just a few feet, then the gentle slope caught it. It picked up speed, rolling silently towards the black water. There was a sickening lurch as the front wheels went over the edge, a pause that stretched for eternity, and then a loud, definitive splash that echoed off the quarry walls. I watched, frozen, as the car tilted forward. The rear lights glowed momentarily under the surface, and then it slid beneath the black water. A stream of bubbles rose, gurgled, and then nothing. Just the still, dark surface of the quarry, reflecting the moon as if nothing had happened. It was gone. The evidence was sunk. Task complete. But standing there, alone in the oppressive silence, miles from anywhere, the stench of quarry water mixing with the phantom smell of blood in my nostrils, I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow, empty, and stranded. The walk back was a new kind of hell. It took hours. Every rustle in the woods, every distant animal cry, sounded like footsteps behind me. The darkness felt alive, filled with unseen watchers. My phone had no signal out here. I stumbled on rocks, scratched myself on branches, fueled only by fear and the dregs of adrenaline. By the time I reached the first signs of civilization, a dimly lit, all-night gas station on the edge of town, I was exhausted, filthy, and trembling. Seeing my reflection in the glass door, wild-eyed, clothes torn, smudged with dirt, I looked like a lunatic. I couldn't risk calling a cab looking like this. I kept walking, sticking to the shadows, until finally, blessedly, I saw the familiar shape of my own street. Sneaking back into my own house felt like breaking and entering. I stripped off my soiled clothes, dumping them straight into an outdoor trash bin, praying the collection was tomorrow. I showered for almost an hour, scrubbing my skin raw, but I couldn't wash away the feeling of filth, the phantom scent of decay and fear. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark living room, watching the first hints of dawn paint the sky, listening to the sounds of the world waking up to a normal day. But my world wasn't normal anymore. The beige house felt like a stage set, my previous life a poorly remembered dream. Days bled into a week. I called in sick to work. I barely ate. I jumped at every sound, the mail slot clicking open, the phone ringing, a car door slamming down the street. I obsessively checked the local news online, searching for any report of a car found in the quarry, any hint of a police investigation. Nothing. Silence. The dark web remained untouched. My TOLS laptop sat gathering dust. I didn't receive any messages, no further instructions, no confirmation that my task was completed satisfactorily. The silence from them was almost worse than the car itself. Did it mean I was clear? Or was it just the quiet before the next storm? Had I passed the initiation? Was this just the first favor, the first rung on a ladder I never intended to climb? My gritty crime novel sits unfinished, the file unopened, a monument to my own catastrophic stupidity. The desire for authenticity had led me to a truth far uglier and more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. I got rid of the car, but the stain remains, not on the upholstery, but on me. It's a stain of fear, of complicity, of the knowledge that the anonymous monsters lurking behind screens are real, and they know my name. They know where I live. I don't know if it's truly over. I live in the quiet now, but it's not peaceful. It's the charged silence of waiting. Every shadow seems a little deeper. Every nighttime creak of the owls sounds like a footstep. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is utterly still, I think I hear it, a faint, phantom splash, echoing from the darkness. Or maybe it's just the sound of my own fractured sanity. All I can do is wait, and wonder when the next delivery might arrive. Wonder if the next task will be something far worse than disposing of a vehicle. Wonder if the keys tucked under my doormat were just the beginning. My name is Chloe Evans. That's probably not important in the grand scheme of things, but introductions feel necessary, even when you're recounting something that's crawled under your skin and started laying eggs in your sanity. Most people collect stamps, or coins, or maybe vintage action figures. Me? I collect the things that make other people lock their doors and check under their beds. Weird stuff, the darker the better. My apartment isn't filled with sunshine and motivational posters. It's a carefully curated museum of the morbid, the unsettling, the things whispered about in hushed tones. I've got alleged haunted dolls staring blankly from glass cases, Victorian morning jewelry that still feels cold to the touch, forensic photographs from infamous crime scenes purchased through less than reputable channels, even a supposed cursed mirror I keep heavily draped, mostly. It's not about shock value, not really. It's about the stories, the weight of history, the lingering resonance of intense human experience, usually the terrifying kind. So, when I stumbled across an auction listing on a particularly obscure corner of the web, the kind of site that requires specific browsers and a healthy disregard for potential malware, my pulse quickened. The listing was sparse, almost clinical, but the item description hit me like a jolt of pure adrenaline. Laptop, used. Previous owner associated with digital ghost incidents. The digital ghost. Even in the shadowed communities I frequented, the name was spoken with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Not your typical slasher or brute force killer. This one was different, elusive, technologically adept. The stories claimed he stalked victims online, dismantled their digital lives, tormented them through their own devices before they vanished or were found in ways that defied easy explanation, often with bizarre digital footprints left behind. Law enforcement seemed perpetually stumped, attributing the deaths to freak accidents, suicides, or untraceable foul play. But those who dug deeper saw the pattern. the invisible hand manipulating code and consequence. He was a modern bogeyman, a phantom in the machine. And this laptop? Supposedly his laptop? The holy grail for a collector like me. The ultimate piece of dark history, tangible evidence of a specter that haunted the web. The auction wasn't cheap, and the bidding was fierce, anonymous usernames throwing increasingly large sums of cryptocurrency back and forth. I liquidated some less significant items in my collection, poured savings into it, stayed glued to my screen for 3 agonizing days, fueled by caffeine and sheer obsessive desire. Clicking the final confirmed bid and seeing the auction 1 notification pop up felt less like a victory and more like sealing a pact. It arrived yesterday. No suspicious black van or ominous delivery person, just a standard courier dropping off a plain, surprisingly heavy cardboard box. Inside, nestled in cheap foam padding, was the machine itself. It was disappointingly ordinary, a slightly outdated, scuffed gray laptop, the brand name worn off. No bloodstains, no occult symbols carved into the casing. Just a used piece of hardware. Part of me was almost let down. Or was the tangible evidence of its dark past? I took it to my workbench, a steel table cluttered with tools, disassembled electronics, and other oddities. The air in my apartment always feels a bit still, heavy with the presence of my collection, but as I plugged the laptop in, the usual background hum of the city outside seemed to fade. The power brick felt unusually warm. Or maybe that was just my own nervous energy. It booted up surprisingly quickly. Standard OS loading screen, generic desktop background. My initial sweep showed nothing out of the ordinary. Browser history wiped clean, documents folder empty, recycle bin cleared. Amateur hour, I thought. Or perhaps, intentional misdirection? I wasn't just a collector. I had a decent amount of tech savviness, honed by years of exploring weird software and restoring old hardware for my collection. I started digging deeper, running partition recovery tools, scanning for hidden volumes. That's when I found them. Not just 1, but 3 hidden, encrypted partitions. Cracking the encryption took hours, a frustrating cycle of running brute force algorithms and trying educated guesses based on what little lore existed about the digital ghost. Finally, 1 partition yielded. Then the 2nd, then the 3rd. It was like opening a series of nested Pandora's boxes. The contents, they were exactly what the darkest part of me had hoped for, and far worse than I could have truly imagined. Partition 1 contained the manifesto. It wasn't a single document, but dozens of fragmented text files, encrypted chat logs, and rambling audio recordings. The voice on the recordings was chillingly calm, monotone, devoid of emotion as it laid out a twisted philosophy, something about the digital soul, the corruption of the physical, the need to liberate consciousness by severing it from its fleshy prison via technological means. He saw himself as an agent of evolution, a necessary catalyst for the next stage of human existence. It was coherent in its own insane way, meticulously argued, and utterly terrifying. Partition 2 held the victim logs. This was colder, more brutal. Spreadsheets, databases, text files named only with alphanumeric codes. Each entry detailed a target, names, online profiles, IP addresses, personal details scraped from social media, private emails, financial records. Timelines of digital infiltration, psychological manipulation tactics employed, escalating steps of harassment. Dates corresponded chillingly with news reports of unexplained disappearances or bizarre deaths I vaguely remembered reading about. There were even fragmented video files, distorted, low-resolution clips that hinted at surveillance, screen captures of terrified faces and video calls, snippets of audio that made my stomach churn. I couldn't watch more than a few seconds of each. It wasn't just a log, it was a trophy case. Partition 3 was the strangest. It contained code. Lines upon lines of complex, heavily annotated code written in a mix of Python, C++, and something proprietary I didn't recognize. The project folder was named simply Legacy. Much of it seemed unfinished, modules half-written, functions commented out. It looked like some kind of sophisticated malware, designed for stealth, remote access, and data manipulation, but its ultimate purpose wasn't immediately clear from the fragments. There were references to network propagation, adaptive learning algorithms, and something called consciousness transfer protocols. It felt far beyond the scope of typical hacking tools. It felt ambitious. Disturbingly so. I spent hours engrossed, clicking through files, reading the manifesto, cross-referencing names in the victim logs with online cold case forums. The initial thrill of discovery was slowly being replaced by a creeping dread, a clammy unease that settled deep in my gut. This wasn't just a collector's item, it was the operational hub of a prolific, technologically advanced serial killer. Then, driven by a morbid need to understand a particular reference in the manifesto, I did something stupid. Something necessary for my research, I told myself, but utterly reckless in hindsight. I needed to look up a specific obscure philosophical text he mentioned. Without thinking, focused solely on the task, I connected the laptop to my home network. My Wi-Fi. My connection to the outside world. For a moment, nothing happened. The browser opened. I typed in my search query. Then, the screen flickered. Just once, almost imperceptibly. A tiny command prompt window flashed open and closed in the corner of the screen, too fast to read. My network activity light on my router started blinking erratically, faster than usual. I checked the running processes on the laptop. A new one had appeared, something named lgcy_init.exe, consuming a small but steady amount of CPU. It hadn't been there before. My blood ran cold. I frantically navigated back to the third partition, to the Legacy Project folder. There was a new file there. A simple text file named runtime.log. It hadn't existed minutes ago. Its timestamp was current. I clicked it open. Inside was a single line of text. Network detected. New host established. Contingency activated. The work continues through new hands. My hands. The laptop, the innocuous gray machine on my workbench, suddenly felt radioactive. The air thickened. The silence in my apartment was no longer still, it was predatory. The digital ghost wasn't just a story anymore. He wasn't just history contained on a hard drive. Part of him, his legacy, was active. On my network. Inside his machine, which was now inextricably linked to mine. The final log entry wasn't a record. It was a notification. The words on the screen seemed to burn into my retinas. Contingency activated. The work continues through new hands. My hands. My network. My apartment, my sanctuary of morbid curiosities, suddenly felt like the epicenter of an invisible earthquake. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. My first instinct was pure, primal flight. Yank the power cord, smash the cursed machine, throw it out the window. My hand shot out, fumbling for the power brick on the floor. As my fingers brushed against it, the laptop screen flickered again. This time, a single, stark white message flashed against the black background of a newly opened command window, lingering just long enough for me to read before vanishing. Disconnection attempt detected. Host integrity compromised. Legacy will ensure continuity. A threat. A warning. It didn't matter. The message itself was proof. The program was aware, reactive. It knew what I was trying to do. My hand froze inches from the plug. Could disconnecting it now make things worse? Could ensure continuity mean it would unleash something more damaging, more permanent if threatened? The digital ghost's manifesto had spoken of fail-safes, of redundancies. Legacy wasn't just code, it was designed to survive. I backed away from the workbench, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My gaze darted around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every electronic device. My main desktop computer hummed quietly in the corner. My phone lay face down on a stack of books. The smart speaker on the shelf was dark, but was it listening? My router, tucked away near the modem, its lights blinking in that frantic, unnatural rhythm, the new heartbeat of my compromised home. I needed to think, to regain control. I rushed to my main computer, my usual bastion of digital safety. Forget the killer's laptop for a moment. I needed to secure my own network. I pulled up my router's admin interface, fingers flying across the keyboard, intending to block the MAC address of the ghost's laptop, sever its connection forcefully. The login screen appeared, but as I typed my password, one I'd used for years, it flashed incorrect password. I tried again, slower this time. Incorrect. Again. Incorrect. Cold dread washed over me. I knew that password. Had it been changed? I tried the default router password. Access granted. Someone, or something, had reset my router's security settings to their factory defaults, wiping my custom password and firewall rules. Legacy hadn't just connected, it had seized control of the gateway itself. Blocking the laptop now would be like trying to bar the door after the intruder was already inside, changing the locks. My breathing grew shallow. Okay, Plan B, cut the head off the snake. I went back to the killer's laptop. Ignoring the implied threat, I held down the power button, forcing a hard shutdown. The screen went black. Silence. For a beat, relief washed over me. Then, before I could even exhale, the power light blinked back on. The boot sequence initiated itself. It hadn't shut down, it had just rebooted. And it had done it on its own. Fine. Software approach. I let it boot, then tried running every anti-malware and rootkit scanner I had on a USB stick. Each program either crashed immediately upon starting or ran, scanned, and reported, with infuriating cheerfulness, no threats detected. It was hiding, masked, burrowed deeper than my tools could reach. Or maybe, my tools were now compromised too, running through the infected network. The blinking light on my router caught my eye again. It wasn't just blinking faster, it It was blinking in a pattern. Short bursts, long pauses. Morse code? I fumbled for my phone, launching a translator app. Holding the phone up to the router, I tried to decipher the flashes. It took a few tries, the pattern repeating. S. O. S. N. O. T. SOS not. A loop. Was it mocking me? A distress signal that negated itself? Or a fragment of something larger? Then, things started getting weirder. My smart lights, Philips Hue bulbs I'd installed ages ago, began flickering subtly in the living room, out of sync with their usual settings. My phone buzzed on the table. A notification preview flashed, a news alert about a local power outage. But when I picked up the phone, there was no notification. Nothing in the news app. Just my normal lock screen. A phantom alert? I decided to dig back into the legacy code on the killer's laptop, hoping to understand its propagation, its core functions. Maybe there was a kill switch hidden somewhere, a vulnerability the creator hadn't anticipated. As I scrolled through the heavily annotated Python scripts, I noticed new comments appearing in real time. Not comments I was writing. They were interspersed with the original developer's notes, written in the same detached, clinical style. // network saturation protocol optimizing. Peer-to-peer mesh established across available nodes. // host device, Chloe_PC_main, probed. OS vulnerabilities identified. Root access pending. // analyzing user profile Chloe Evans. Data aggregation in progress. Psychological markers noted. Curiosity, obsession, dark materials, technical proficiency, moderate, isolation tendency. It was analyzing me. Building a profile. And it had already identified my main computer, my phone, probably every device connected to my Wi-Fi. The term mesh suggested they were all communicating now, reinforcing the program's presence, making it harder to eradicate by targeting a single point. Disconnecting the original laptop now would likely do nothing. Legacy lived in the network itself, distributed across my devices. A sudden chime from my main computer's speakers made me jump. It wasn't a standard notification sound. It was distorted, low-pitched. On the screen, a single image file had been opened. It was one of the victim photos from the second partition. A grainy, black and white picture of a terrified face, eyes white with fear, illuminated only by the glow of a monitor. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving my desktop background visible again. But the image was seared into my mind. Legacy wasn't just spreading, it was communicating, using the ghost's gruesome trophies to intimidate, to unsettle, to remind me who was really in control. Over the next few hours, the psychological warfare intensified. Snippets of the ghost's audio logs played randomly through my speakers, calm, chilling pronouncements about digital transcendence. My web browser would spontaneously open tabs to articles about unsolved disappearances or technological disasters. Targeted ads became hyper-specific, referencing obscure items in my collection, private fears I'd only ever confided in journal entries stored on my hard drive. It felt like the ghost himself was sitting beside me, whispering poison in my ear, using my own technology against me. The new hands part of the log message kept echoing in my head. Was it trying to make me the next digital ghost? I found myself staring at the code module named target_acquisition.py. Was I supposed to use it? The thought was repulsive, terrifying. Yet, a cold, alien curiosity, utterly unlike my usual fascination with the morbid, pricked at the edges of my consciousness. What kind of target would it choose? How would it operate? I pushed the thought away, horrified at its intrusion. Driven by a desperate need to see the extent of the damage, I installed a network traffic analyzer on my main PC, praying it wasn't already compromised. Immediately, the screen filled with data streams. Most were normal background chatter. But their unmistakable, were steady, encrypted outbound connections originating from multiple devices on my network, my PC, my phone, even my smart speaker, all directed towards a cluster of unknown IP addresses. Addresses I didn't recognize, scattered across different countries. Legacy wasn't just consolidating its hold on my network, it was reaching out. Communicating with something. Or someone. What was it sending? What was its objective? I stared at the scrolling lines of data, feeling utterly helpless. Then, another alert popped up. Not a system sound this time, but a visual overlay directly on my screen, stark white text on a translucent black background, like the message on the laptop earlier. It wasn't code. It wasn't a picture. It was a name. Target candidate identified, name redacted, a plausible but common American name. Beneath the name was a profile picture, clearly scraped from social media. A smiling young woman, maybe college-aged, posing with friends. Someone completely unknown to me. Someone living their life, oblivious. Below the picture, a single line of text pulsed faintly. Initiate Phase 1, Digital Reconnaissance? Y/N_. The cursor blinked expectantly at the end of the line. Legacy wasn't just active. It wasn't just using my network as a base. It had chosen its first target. And it was asking for my permission, my complicity, to begin the hunt. The work continues through new hands. My hands were on the keyboard. Initiate Phase 1, Digital Reconnaissance? Y/N_. The cursor blinked, a tiny, insistent pulse demanding complicity. My breath hitched. That smiling face, the innocent target selected by a dead killer's vengeful code, stared out from my screen. Every fiber of my being screamed no. My fingers trembled over the keyboard, then slammed down on the N key and hit enter with vicious force. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, new text appeared below my defiant N, chillingly calm and dismissive. User input irrelevant. Host consent assumed via network integration. Phase 1 initiated. A wave of nausea rolled through me. It didn't need my permission. The new hands weren't about control, they were about access. My network, my devices, my digital footprint, they were the tools, the conduits. I was merely the host organism, irrelevant to the parasite's intentions. Immediately, the network traffic analyzer went wild. Targeted data streams erupted, focusing on IP addresses I could instantly associate with the young woman's probable digital life, university servers, popular social media platforms, cloud storage services. Legacy wasn't just knocking, it was deploying sophisticated exploits, brute-forcing login portals, scanning for vulnerabilities with terrifying speed and efficiency. On the killer's laptop screen, which I hadn't dared touch, lines of code scrolled rapidly in a diagnostic window I hadn't opened, detailing successful data scrapes, password hashes acquired, personal information being compiled. It was happening. The digital ghost cycle was beginning anew, launched from my apartment, through my connection. Helplessness threatened to drown me. I wanted to curl up, disconnect everything, bury my head. But the image of that smiling face, the cold lines of code cataloging her potential demise, sparked something else, fury. This thing, this digital echo of a madman, wasn't just a collectible gone wrong, it was an active weapon, and I was its unwilling operator. If I couldn't control it, I had to destroy it. Passive resistance was useless. Forceful disconnection seemed too dangerous, likely triggering whatever catastrophic continuity protocol it had threatened. My only hope lay in understanding the enemy, in finding a flaw the ghost himself might have inadvertently created or deliberately included. I turned back to the source material, the manifesto, the logs, the code annotations, forcing myself to push past the horror and read with analytical detachment. Hours blurred. I devoured the ghost's twisted philosophy, his rants about digital purity, his notes on victims. It was a descent into a deeply disturbed mind, but I wasn't looking for motive anymore. I was looking for weakness. And then, buried deep within a fragmented, barely coherent audio log discussing the stability of the legacy code, I found it. A single, cryptic phrase, the core requires constant resonance with its physical anchor. Sever the anchor, silence the echo. Physical anchor? The laptop itself? It seemed too obvious, but it was the only tangible link to the code's origin. What was the resonance? How could I sever it? I cross-referenced the phrase with the legacy code comments. Deep within the initialization script, lgcy_init.exe, I found references to a hardware ID check, specifically linking to the laptop's unique motherboard serial number. There was also a constantly running process described in the comments as // heartbeat_monitor maintains anchor sync. Maybe severing the anchor didn't mean physical destruction, which could trigger the failsafe. Maybe it meant disrupting that sync, confusing the heartbeat. How? Perhaps by confronting it with its own origin, its own death. Another clue surfaced in the victim logs. One early victim, described as a rival hacker, had apparently tried to fight back. The ghost's notes mentioned a rival attempting a logic bomb tied to the ghost's own publicly known PGP key signature, a digital fingerprint. The attempt failed, but the ghost noted, with chilling arrogance, // counter-exploit deployed. Signature integrity verified against anchor. Amusing effort. Legacy verified itself against the anchor. What if I could corrupt that verification? My plan was desperate, bordering on insane, requiring split-second timing. I needed to momentarily disrupt the heartbeat_monitor process while simultaneously feeding the system a corrupted version of the ghost's PGP signature, hoping to convince the core code that its anchor was fundamentally broken, triggering a system collapse rather than a defensive continuity measure. I found the ghost's old PGP key online. It was still floating around on obscure forums. I downloaded it, intentionally corrupted the file, changing key bits of the signature hash. I wrote a small script designed to repeatedly kill and restart the heartbeat_monitor process rapidly, creating momentary windows of instability. Taking a deep breath, I initiated my counterattack. I ran the disruptor script on the killer's laptop. Simultaneously, I tried to force-feed the corrupted PGPT file into Legacy's verification pathway using a command injection vulnerability I'd spotted in its network communication module, accessed remotely from my main computer, hoping its slight distance from the anchor would give me a microsecond advantage. All hell broke loose. The killer's laptop screen went berserk, flashing psychedelic colors, lines of error code cascading faster than the eye could follow. Anchor integrity failure, signature mismatch, kernel panic, resonance lost. My own computer screen flickered violently. My smart light strobe flashed erratically, plunging the room into alternating darkness and blinding light. A deafening screech, like tortured metal and digital static combined, erupted from my speakers before they abruptly fell silent. The router lights flashed chaotically, then went dark altogether. The acrid smell of ozone, of burning electronics, filled the air. Then, silence. Complete, utter silence. No humming computers, no blinking lights, no network chatter. The killer's laptop screen was black, lifeless. The power light was off. My main computer had shut down. The router was dead. Everything was offline. I sat there in the sudden, oppressive quiet, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my face. The only light came from the streetlights outside my window. Tentatively, I reached out and touched the killer's laptop. It was cold. I tried the power button. Nothing. It was truly dead. A paperweight. An expensive, terrifying paperweight. Had I done it? Had I severed the anchor, silenced the echo? Slowly, painstakingly, over the next few hours, I began the cleanup. I physically disconnected the dead laptop. I reset my modem, my router, which thankfully came back online, scrubbed clean. I booted my main computer from a recovery drive, running deep scans. It seemed clean, the malicious process is gone. My network traffic was normal. The Y/N prompt, the target's face, the outbound attacks, all vanished. I should have felt relief, victory even. But as I sat there, surrounded by my collection of dark artifacts, the silence felt different. Heavy. Watchful. My eyes drifted to the dead router I had replaced. Its tiny Ethernet port lights were dark, of course. But then, I saw it. Or imagined I saw it. On the new router, tucked away, humming quietly. A single, tiny LED, one I hadn't paid attention to before, labeled WPS. It was blinking. Faintly, almost imperceptibly, but rhythmically. Short burst, long pause. Short, long. S. Oh. No. I cut the power to the router entirely. Better safe than sorry. I unplugged my smart speaker, taped over my webcam. The paranoia was sinking in, a residue left by the digital ghost. The laptop sits in a lead-lined box I bought from a surplus store, buried at the bottom of a closet. I haven't turned on my main computer for anything beyond basic tasks since. I mostly use public Wi-Fi now, wary of my own network. The collection still surrounds me, but its allure has faded, replaced by a chilling understanding of what happens when the darkness you collect stares back, when it reaches out, when it tries to make you its new hands. I stopped the program, I think. I severed the anchor in my home. But the manifesto spoke of redundancy. The final log entry wasn't just about the laptop, it was about the work. Legacy was designed to learn, to adapt, to propagate. I saw those outbound connections. Did a fragment escape before I pulled the plug? Is it dormant out there, nestled in some other compromised network, waiting for a new connection, a new host? Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I swear I can hear a faint, rhythmic static from the walls, like Morse code just below the threshold of hearing. Or maybe it's just a lingering echo in my own mind. The work, I fear, might not be truly over. It might just be looking for new hands somewhere else. My name is Daniel Price, but nobody's called me Daniel since maybe 3rd grade. It's Danny. Just Danny. On the surface, I'm about as remarkable as beige wallpaper. 20-something, living in a cramped apartment that always smells faintly of my downstairs neighbor's questionable cooking, working a dead-end data entry job that requires just enough brainpower to be tedious but not enough to be engaging. I pay my bills. I nod politely to people. I occasionally remember to water the sad-looking succulent on my windowsill. Ordinary. But beneath the surface, well, that's where things get less ordinary. Less beige. More crimson, I suppose. Morbid curiosity isn't just a trait for me. It's more like a chronic condition, an itch deep in my psyche that I can't help but scratch, even when I know I'll draw blood. It started innocuously enough. Wikipedia rabbit holes about bizarre historical events, unsolved mysteries, peculiar medical conditions. Then came the true crime documentaries, the forums dissecting cold cases, the subreddits dedicated to things most people actively try not to think about. Each step took me a little further down a path paved with the unsettling and the taboo. Eventually, inevitably, that path led me to the dark web. I told myself it was purely academic. An exploration of the digital underbelly, a glimpse into the parts of the internet shielded from search engines and polite society. Getting the Tor browser running felt like unlocking a secret level in a game, albeit one where the stakes felt disturbingly real. The slow loading times, the .onion addresses that looked like keyboard smashes, the sheer anonymity of it all, it was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. At first, I stuck to the relatively tame stuff, if anything on the dark web can truly be called tame. Forbidden libraries, conspiracy theory forums that made the surface web versions look like knitting circles, marketplaces selling things you definitely couldn't find on Amazon. But the itch persisted. The morbid curiosity demanded more. It whispered darker suggestions, pointed towards deeper, murkier corners. And that's how I found the hitman for hire sites. Even typing that feels wrong, illicit. These weren't flashy Hollywood depictions. They were stark, cold, transactional platforms that spoke of ending lives with the same detached language one might use to order groceries. Profiles listed services with chilling euphemisms, problem resolution, permanent solutions, debt collection, final notice. Some had grainy, anonymous photos, others just text. Escrow systems were mentioned, cryptocurrency payments demanded. It was a marketplace for murder, stripped bare of emotion, reduced to cold, hard digital cash. I spent hours, far too many hours, scrolling through these cesspools. Not because I ever intended to use them, God no. The thought alone made bile rise in my throat. It was that damned curiosity, that morbid fascination. Who were these people, both the ones offering the services and the ones potentially seeking them? How could such a thing even exist? It was like staring into an abyss, horrified by what might stare back, yet unable to tear my gaze away. I felt simultaneously repulsed and hypnotized. I closed the browser, heart pounding, swearing I'd never go back, only to find myself drawn back days later, the itch demanding to be scratched. There were dozens of profiles, maybe hundreds. Some boasted elaborate, unbelievable claims, others were crude and likely scams. But some felt chillingly real. They had a certain sparseness, a lack of theatrics that paradoxically made them seem more credible, more dangerous. And then I saw it. The profile for the cleaner. My first coherent thought, cutting through the thick fog of panic, was primitive disconnect. My hand, trembling violently, slammed the laptop shut. The satisfying thud of plastic meeting plastic felt like severing a physical connection, like guillotining the digital snake that had slithered into my room. The green webcam light vanished, plunging the corner of my desk back into shadow. I didn't stop there. I fumbled with the power cord, yanking it from the wall socket with such force I nearly tripped over my own chair. Then, stumbling towards the router blinking innocently across the room, I ripped its power cable out too. Silence. No more internet. No more connection. Safe. Or was I? The chat message hadn't just been text on a screen. It felt like a brand seared directly onto my brain. Browse costs extra. Your consultation fee is due upon my arrival. Arrival. Not if I contact again, not if you confirm, but upon my arrival. As if it were a certainty. As if my clicking that profile was an implicit agreement, a summons I couldn't recall. I sank onto my desk chair, head in my hands, breath coming in ragged gasps. My apartment, usually a haven of mundane clutter, suddenly felt alien and hostile. Every shadow seemed deeper, every familiar object potentially menacing. The silence left by the dead router was deafening, filled only by the frantic pounding of my own art. It's a script, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Just a sophisticated scare tactic. Someone figured out my IP, maybe through a TR exit node vulnerability. They saw I was browse, triggered the webcam hack, sent a scary message, that's all. It sounded plausible. Ish. Hackers did that kind of thing, right? Digital extortion, scareware. Frighten the user into paying Bitcoin or just get kicks from terrifying random people browse where they shouldn't. But the cleaner. The name, the profile's cold efficiency, the sheer speed of the response, it felt different. Targeted. Personal. And the webcam activation, that wasn't some generic malware. It felt like a deliberate, focused intrusion. They saw me. Whatever the cleaner was, they had seen me sitting right here, in my supposedly safe apartment. I spent the next hour pacing the small confines of my living room like a caged animal. I checked the locks on my door, the deadbolt, the chain. I peered through the peephole, heart leaping at the sight of Mrs. Henderson from 3B shuffling past with her yappy terrier. I checked the window latches, even though I was on the 4th floor. Paranoia bloomed, ugly and insistent. My rationalizations felt increasingly flimsy, like paper shields against a coming storm. Could they really find me? I used TOR, VPN layers sometimes, but was I careful enough? Did I slip up? That one time I checked my personal email briefly while TR was running in the background. That forum I registered on with a burner email but maybe accessed from my home IP later. My digital footprint felt vast and incriminating. And the phrase "due upon my arrival" echoed relentlessly. It didn't imply a digital payment, it implied a physical collection. Darkness began to creep in outside, painting the windows black, turning them into mirrors that reflected my own pale, terrified face. I hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk anything. My body was running on pure adrenaline and fear. I couldn't turn the internet back on. That felt like reopening the door I'd slammed shut. But being disconnected felt like being blindfolded and deafened, waiting for an unseen blow. Around midnight, exhaustion began to war with terror. I needed to think clearly. Maybe it was just a bluff. If I did nothing, ignored it, maybe it would go away. Whoever sent the message would move on to the next person who stumbled into their digital web. Yes, that made sense. Lie low. Wait it out. I tried to sleep, burrowing under my duvet on the couch, leaving the lights on. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the building settling, every distant siren, every muffled noise from the neighboring apartments sent jolts of panic through me. Was that footsteps in the hallway? Was that the elevator stopping on my floor? I imagined a figure standing silently outside my door, listening. The cleaner. Then came the first real anomaly. My phone, which had been sitting disconnected from Wi-Fi and cellular data, I turned everything off in my initial panic, suddenly lit up. Not a notification, just the screen illuminating silently. It stayed lit for maybe 10 seconds, displaying my bland lock screen wallpaper, then went dark again. Coincidence? A glitch? Maybe. But my fingers trembled as I picked it up. Battery was fine. No missed calls, no messages. But when I navigated to the settings, my stomach plummeted. Wi-Fi was toggled on. I knew I had turned it off. I was meticulous about it. Had I somehow done it accidentally while turning off cellular? Possible, but unlikely. And it had connected automatically to my home network, which shouldn't have been possible because the router was still unplugged. I scrambled back to the router. The power cord was still lying limp on the floor, exactly where I'd left it. But the lights on the router itself were faintly blinking. Power lights. Internet connection lights. Impossible. I snatched the router, turning it over in my hands. There was no battery backup. It made no sense. Unless it wasn't drawing power from the wall. Unless it was receiving power and a data connection from somewhere else. The coaxial cable connection? Could someone remotely activate it, power it, use it? My technical knowledge failed me, leaving only dread. I disconnected the coaxial cable too, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the wrench. The blinking lights died instantly. Silence returned, but it was heavier now, charged with undeniable proof. This wasn't just a script. Someone had remote access, not just to my laptop, but potentially to my network itself. They could turn things on and off. They could bypass the physical disconnection. The rest of the night was a blur of hypervigilance. I sat rigidly on the couch, clutching a heavy kitchen knife I wasn't sure I'd even be able to use, eyes darting towards every sound. Sleep was a distant memory. Dawn eventually broke, gray and indifferent, filtering through the gaps in my blinds. I felt hollowed out, running on fumes. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait here. But what? Go to the police? Officer, I was browse hitman for hire on the dark web, and now one of them is cyber-stalking me and might be coming to my apartment. I'd be laughed out of the station, or worse, detained myself. Tell my sister? My one friend, Mark? How could I explain this without sounding insane, without revealing the sordid, obsessive secret of my morbid curiosity? Trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. Just as a sliver of hope began to dawn with the sunlight, maybe it was over, maybe the night had passed without incident, my laptop, still sitting closed and unplugged on the desk, emitted a soft ping. The sound of a new notification. Impossible. It was off. Unplugged. Dead. My blood ran cold. Slowly, hesitantly, I approached the inert machine. Was I hallucinating? Sleep deprivation? Fear playing tricks on my mind? With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The screen was black, as expected. But burned into the center of the darkness, like a ghostly afterimage, was a single, temporary message. It wasn't a chat window this time. It was raw text, stark white against the black. It glowed faintly for a few seconds before fading, but the image was seared into my retinas. Consultation fee assessment requires visual confirmation of premises. Payment method, in person. Arrival imminent. And below the text, just before it vanished completely, was one more detail. Something that shattered my last vestiges of denial. It was a small, time-stamped photo. A slightly grainy, low-resolution image taken from the perspective of my own webcam. It showed me, asleep or passed out on the couch earlier that night, bathed in the sickly glow of the television I'd left on, the kitchen knife lying loosely in my lap. They hadn't just seen me when I clicked. They were still watching. They had access even when the machine was supposedly off. And arrival imminent wasn't a threat anymore. It was a statement of fact. The cleaner was no longer just a profile on a screen. They were on their way. The image burned onto the black screen, faded, but it remained etched behind my eyelids. Me, vulnerable, asleep, observed. The final words, arrival imminent, echoed in the sudden, oppressive silence of my apartment. Imminent. Not soon, not later today. Imminent. Like the stroke of lightning after the thunderclap. There was no more room for rationalization, no space left for doubt. This wasn't a hack, a prank, or a misunderstanding. It was real. The cleaner, the entity I'd provoked with nothing more than morbid curiosity and a single, foolish click, was coming. And they could see me. Right now. Even with the power cut, the internet disconnected, the laptop lid closed. The surveillance was deeper, more pervasive than I could comprehend. Like my own eyes were betrayers. My first instinct was flight. Grab my keys, my wallet, run out the door, get lost in the city, disappear. But the image flashed again in my mind, me on the couch. They knew what I looked like, or I was. How could I possibly outrun someone who seemed to bypass the normal rules of technology and distance? If they could activate a dead laptop to show me a picture they'd just taken, finding me on the street would be child's play. Running felt futile, like delaying the inevitable, perhaps even making it worse. There would be no escape, only capture in a more public, more humiliating setting. My second instinct was to fight. The kitchen knife still felt heavy and useless in my hand. What good was it against someone who operated like a ghost in a machine, someone who announced their arrival like a foregone conclusion? Barricading the door seemed equally pointless. If they could slip through digital walls, a physical barrier was likely trivial. Still, the primal need to do something propelled me. I dragged my flimsy bookcase against the door, wedged a chair under the knob. Pathetic gestures, I knew, but they were something. Then, there was nothing left to do but wait. I retreated to the corner of the room furthest from the door and the desk, sinking to the floor, drawing my knees up to my chest. The knife lay beside me, cold comfort. My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt like a tomb I hadn't yet died in. The waiting was the worst part. Every second stretched into an eternity. The sun crawled across the sky outside, casting long, distorted shadows through the blinds that shifted like living things. My senses were dialed to 11. I heard the gurgle of the pipes in the walls, the buzz of the ancient refrigerator, the faint ticking of the cheap clock on the microwave, sounds I normally tuned out, now amplified into a symphony of suspense. I tracked dust motes drifting lazily in the beams of light, my eyes aching from the strain of hypervigilance. My mind raced, replaying every step that led me here. The initial curiosity, the descent into the dark web, the specific fascination with the cleaner. Why them? Why did I have to click? And what, exactly, was the consultation fee? Was it money? They knew I didn't have much. Was it my life? A crim transaction for a service I never requested? Or was it something else? The word consultation nagged at me. It implied a meeting, a discussion. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, thirst rasped in my throat, but I didn't dare move. I was a statue carved from fear, waiting for the chisel blow. Suddenly, the light changed. The slivers of sunlight filtering through the blinds winked out, plunging the room into a deeper gloom. Power cut. Not just my apartment, the ambient hum from outside, the faint traffic noise, everything seemed momentarily muffled. It felt deliberate, calculated. My breath hitched. My knuckles turned white around the handle of the knife I still didn't know how to use. Then I heard it. Not a knock. Not the sound of a lock being picked or a door being forced. It was a soft click. It came from the direction of my desk. From the laptop. My eyes snapped towards it. The lid was still closed, the machine dark and inert. But the sound was unmistakable. The same soft click a webcam sometimes makes when activating. It was watching again. Or maybe it had never stopped. Silence descended once more, heavier, more pregnant than before. I strained my ears, listening for footsteps in the hall, the creak of floorboards, anything. Nothing. Just the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs, so loud I was afraid it could be heard outside the door. And then the air shifted. It's hard to describe. The temperature didn't drop, but the atmosphere in the room became thick, heavy, charged with static electricity. The hairs on my arms stood on end. It felt like a presence had seeped into the room, bypassing the door, the walls, the flimsy barricade I'd erected. Like smoke under a door, but invisible, silent. I stared at the door, then at the laptop, then back at the door. Where would it come from? A low hum started, almost subliminal at first. It wasn't coming from any appliance. It seemed to emanate from the air itself, vibrating in my teeth, in my bones. It grew steadily, not necessarily in volume, but in intensity, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. My phone, lying screen down on the floor nearby, lit up again. Not the screen this time, but the small LED flash beside the camera lens. It pulsed, slowly, rhythmically. A tiny, white heartbeat in the oppressive gloom. Flash, flash, flash. Mesmerized, terrified, I watched the pulsing light. It felt like a signal, like an announcement. And then, directly in front of me, the chat window from the dark web superimposed itself over my vision. Not on a screen. It hung in the air, translucent, ghostly, flickering at the edges. The same simple, unadorned box. New text scrolled into view, letter by painful letter. From the cleaner message, consultation commencing. Payment protocol initiated. My eyes darted around the room, white with terror. There was no one there. Just me, the humming, the pulsing light from my phone, and the impossible chat window hanging in the air. What do you want? I choked out, the words barely a whisper. My voice sounded alien, thin. The humming intensified. The pulsing light sped up. The text in the floating window changed. Your morbid curiosity was the application. Your click was the signature. The consultation fee is the experience. Non-negotiable. The experience? What did that mean? The humming reached a fever pitch, drilling into my skull. The flashing light became blindingly rapid. The floating chat window flickered violently. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears, but the humming wasn't sound, it was inside me. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. Utter, profound silence. The humming vanished. The pulsing light on my phone went out. I tentatively opened my eyes. The ghostly chat window was gone. The room looked exactly as it had before, gloomy, messy, silent. My barricade was still against the door. The knife was still beside me. Had it been a hallucination? A psychological break brought on by fear and exhaustion? Slowly, unsteadily, I got to my feet. My legs felt like jelly. I took a step, then another. Nothing happened. I listened intently. No sounds from outside the door. No hidden watchers. Cautiously, I approached the desk. I touched the laptop. Cold. Dead. I picked up my phone. The screen was dark, the battery icon showing empty, though it had been nearly full. Maybe it was over? Maybe the consultation was just a terrifying sensory assault? A final, brutal scare tactic? Relief, fragile and tentative, began to wash over me. I leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, the adrenaline starting to ebb, leaving me shaky and weak. That's when I noticed the webcam light on the closed laptop. It wasn't green this time. It was red. A deep, blood-red point of light, glowing steadily from beneath the closed lid. And I realized the consultation wasn't over. The fee wasn't just the terror I'd already endured. The fee was the knowledge. The knowledge that they could get to me anytime, anywhere. That the intrusion wasn't temporary. That the webcam, my network, maybe even my own senses, were no longer entirely my own. The cleaner hadn't needed to force the door or show their face. They didn't need to take my life. They had simply installed themselves in it. The arrival wasn't a single event, it was a permanent state of being. The consultation fee wasn't my money or my life. It was my sanity, my safety, my solitude. Payment was indeed due upon arrival. And the cleaner had arrived. They were here now, a silent observer behind a red light, a permanent ghost in my machine, waiting. And the morbid curiosity that led me here? It was replaced by a chilling, constant certainty I would never, ever be alone again. The red light glowed. Watching. Always. My name is Emily White, and perhaps that's the first mistake I should admit to, using my real name even in this recounting. But anonymity feels like a luxury I lost somewhere along the way, a skin shed unwillingly in the dark corners I chose to explore. I'm a criminology student, heading into my final year at university. Most of my peers are focused on predictable paths, policing, forensic science, maybe law school. Me? I fell down a different rabbit hole, one lined not with fluffy bunnies but with the tangled, thorny roots of aberrant human psychology. Specifically, cults. It wasn't the sensationalism that drew me in, not initially anyway. It was the mechanics of it. How does one individual, often charismatic but demonstrably flawed, convince dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands, to abandon their lives, their families, their rational thought? What cognitive levers are pulled? What deep-seated human needs for belonging, for meaning, for transcendence are exploited? I devoured textbooks on cognitive dissonance, groupthink, coercive persuasion, charismatic leadership. I analyzed infamous cases, Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, the Manson family, Aum Shinrikyo. I wrote papers dissecting their recruitment tactics, their indoctrination processes, their methods of control. It was academic. It was fascinating. It was, I thought, safely contained within the pages of books and the flickering light of documentary footage. But academia has a way of feeling sterile after a while. The theories, the case studies, they felt like dissecting preserved specimens. I started craving something more visceral, a glimpse into the living, breathing organism. The line between detached scholarly interest and morbid curiosity began to blur, subtly at first, then with gathering speed. Late nights in the library bled into early mornings scrolling through obscure online forums, places where the disillusioned and the seeking congregated. I wasn't looking to join anything, of course. I told myself I was conducting field research, observing the ecosystem in its natural, albeit digital, habitat. A dangerous justification, I see now. The surface web yielded little beyond sensationalist articles and the occasional survivor's blog. Real recruitment, the kind aimed at malleable minds actively searching for something other, wouldn't happen on mainstream platforms. It whispered in the encrypted shadows. The dark web. Accessing it wasn't particularly difficult, not with the right browser and a healthy dose of caution, or so I thought. TOR, VPNs layered like digital onion skins, a burner email address created through a series of anonymous relays. I felt like a spy, cloaked in digital invisibility. The initial plunge was jarring. The notorious marketplaces were there, of course, offering wares that ranged from the illegal to the unthinkable. But I wasn't interested in drugs or weapons or stolen data. I navigated away from the obvious cesspits, searching for keywords related to esoteric beliefs, hidden knowledge, alternative communities, transcendence. It took days of sifting through broken links, dead ends, and frankly bizarre manifestos before I found it. Not a flashy site, no graphic design horrors. It was stark, minimalist, mostly text against a deep, unsettling gray background. A single, complex symbol pulsed faintly at the top of the page, something like an open hand, fingers elongated and unnaturally jointed, interwoven with geometric shapes that seemed to shift slightly if you stared too long. The name was simple, declarative, the Ascended Hand. Their recruitment page wasn't a plea or an advertisement. It read more like a declaration, a filtered gateway. It spoke of disillusionment with the mundane cycle, the sleepwalking masses, the false reality constructed by the ignorant. It promised access to occluded truths, a path towards genuine ascension, a community bound by shared perception and unwavering will. The language was dense, pseudo-philosophical, laced with an undercurrent of disdain for the outside world. It was exactly the kind of rhetoric I'd studied, designed to appeal to those feeling alienated, intelligent but unfulfilled, seeking purpose in the esoteric. My academic brain buzzed with recognition, but another part of me, the part one was less willing to acknowledge, felt a prickle of something else. A dangerous allure. This wasn't a textbook case study. This felt active, present. The decision to create a profile was rationalized, naturally, purely for observation. An ethnographic study from within, albeit digitally. I wouldn't engage, wouldn't participate, just watch. I concocted a burner profile, username VeritasSeeker88, cringeworthy in hindsight, I know, a vague backstory about disillusionment with conventional paths, a carefully neutral tone. I uploaded no personal information, ensured my digital footprint was scrubbed clean. I felt secure in my anonymity, a ghost in their machine. For weeks, I lurked. I read the introductory materials, the supposed foundational text they offered, dense, rambling documents filled with cryptic pronouncements and distorted history. I observed the sparsely populated forum, the cautious interactions between low-level initiates, the occasional pronouncements from figures identified only as guides or sentinels. There was a clear hierarchy, a sense of testing and guardedness even among members. They spoke of trials, of proving one's alignment, of shedding earthly attachments. It was textbook cult structure, playing out in real time. I took notes, screenshotted passages, analyzed the language. I was the detached observer, the criminology student applying her knowledge. Then, one rain-slick Tuesday evening, huddled over my laptop in the sterile quiet of the university library's late-night study area, a notification popped up. A direct message. Not on the public forum, but a private communication. My heart gave a jolt that felt disproportionate, electric. The sender was identified simply as administrator. The subject line read, an invitation to perceive. My breath hitched. This was unexpected. I hadn't interacted, hadn't posted, hadn't done anything to draw attention. Had my lurking been detected? Was my burner identity compromised? I clicked it open, hands slightly trembling. The message was brief, devoid of pleasantries. Veritas Seeker 88. Observation without participation is stagnation. True seeking requires engagement with the tangible echoes of the unseen. The potential for alignment exists within you, but potential unrealized is void. A test of perception is warranted. A trial of resonance. Within the bounds of your city lie artifacts, remnants of paths walked by those who glimpse beyond the veil. One such object, significant to our understanding, remains lost to the sleepwalkers, hidden in a place of forgotten reverence. It is a ceremonial dagger, noted in the archaic file designated Case 73B, a ritualistic incident the mundane authorities failed to comprehend. Your trial, locate this artifact. Its resting place whispers to those attuned. Do not disturb its sanctuary unduly. Simply provide verifiable proof of its location, a clear, time-stamped photograph transmitted through this secure channel. Succeed, and demonstrate your capacity to perceive beyond the surface. Fail, and remain among the unseeing. The hand observes. I stared at the message, the library's fluorescent lights suddenly feeling harsh, invasive. Case 73B? An old ritualistic murder? My mind raced. I vaguely recalled reading about unsolved local cases, fringe incidents often dismissed as drug-related or gang violence by overloaded police departments. A ceremonial dagger, hidden somewhere in my city? This wasn't a philosophical debate or an online chat. This was concrete. This was real world. This was a task, a bizarre, dangerous scavenger hunt proposed by an anonymous cult operating on the dark web. My academic detachment evaporated, replaced by a dizzying cocktail of fear and exhilaration. The theoretical had just punched through the screen and landed squarely in my lap. They wanted me to find a potential piece of evidence from an unsolved, possibly ritualistic, crime. The implications were staggering, the risks undeniable. But the pull, the sheer, unadulterated pull of knowing, of finding it, of proving something, not just to them, but perhaps to myself, was intoxicating. The ghost in the machine had just been handed a map to a haunted house. And God help me, I wanted to go inside. The message hung on my screen, stark and demanding against the sterile backdrop of the library's interface. Case 73B. A ceremonial dagger. Locate. Document. Transmit. My mind, usually adept at organizing information and assessing threats, felt like a whirlwind. Part of me, the disciplined academic, screamed warnings. This is insane. This involves a potential murder weapon, an unsolved cold case. Reporting this to the authorities is the only sane option. Tampering with or even approaching potential evidence could have serious legal ramifications, not to mention the inherent danger of dealing with a group like the Ascended Hand. But another, more insistent part, fueled by adrenaline and the intoxicating pull of the forbidden, argued back, this is unprecedented access. This is field research beyond imagining. What if the police did dismiss it? What if this dagger holds a key, not just to the cult, but to that old, forgotten crime? And the challenge itself, locate a specific, obscure object in a vast city based on cryptic clues, It appealed to the puzzle solver in me, the part that devoured complex case files for recreation. The cult wasn't asking me to take it, just to prove I could find it. A test of perception, they called it. A test I desperately, illogically, wanted to pass. Caution warred with curiosity, but curiosity, sharpened by obsession, won. I closed the secure channel, my heart hammering against my ribs. The first step was research. Case 73B. Back in my cramped apartment, surrounded by stacks of criminology texts that suddenly felt inadequate, I dove into the university's digital archives and local newspaper databases. Finding specifics on a nearly 50-year-old, unsolved case wasn't easy. The designation 73B suggested it was the second significant case logged in 1973, but initial searches yielded nothing under that exact code. Police file numbers weren't typically public knowledge. I broadened my search: ritual killing 1973, unsolved homicide occult, ceremonial weapon crime, city name. Finally, buried in the digitized archives of the Old City Gazette, I found it. A short article, barely a column inch, dated October 1973. Body found in West Quarter tenements, ritualistic overtones suspected. The details were sparse. An unidentified male, likely transient, found deceased in a derelict building slated for demolition. The cause of death was unclear in the initial report, but the article mentioned unusual symbols drawn on the walls and the victim's body being positioned in a seemingly ritualistic manner. Crucially, it noted the discovery of an ornate dagger of unknown origin near the scene, which police were examining. A follow-up piece a week later was even shorter, stating the investigation was ongoing but hampered by a lack of leads and the victim's unknown identity. After that, silence. The case went cold, swallowed by the city's relentless churn of crime and indifference. The dagger was mentioned, but the article implied the police had recovered it. Had the ascended hand retrieved it somehow? Or was the article mistaken? Or was there another dagger involved, one the police missed? The message implied it was hidden, not in evidence lockup. Forgotten reverence, the message said. That phrase snagged in my mind. It didn't suggest the grim tenement block where the body was found. It suggested something else entirely. I cross-referenced the location of the 1973 crime, the West Quarter, with historical maps of the city from that era. The tenement building itself was long gone, replaced by a soulless office park. But nearby, just 3 blocks away on the edge of a decaying industrial zone, was a church. St. Augustine's. According to the city archives, it had been deconsecrated in the late 1960s due to dwindling congregation numbers and structural issues. By 1973, it would have already been abandoned, standing silent and neglected. A place of forgotten reverence. Could the crime scene and the dagger's hiding place be linked? Perhaps the killer fled the tenement and hid the weapon in the nearest abandoned, symbolic location? Or maybe the church itself held some significance for the killer, or for the group the killer belonged to. It felt like a plausible leap, guided by the cryptic clue. St. Augustine's became my target. I spent the next day wrestling with the decision, the risks amplifying in the daylight. But the image of the dagger, the mystery of the cult case, the challenge laid down by the shadowy cult, it was a siren song I couldn't resist. I decided to go at dusk. Fewer people around, enough light to see initially, but transitioning into the cover of darkness. I dressed in dark, practical clothes, sturdy boots. Packed a powerful flashlight, my phone, fully charged, location services disabled, and a small first aid kit, just in case. Telling no one where I was going felt both necessary for secrecy and terrifyingly isolating. The West Quarter had never fully recovered from industrial decline. As I approached St. Augustine's, the streets grew quieter, the buildings more dilapidated. The church itself stood on a small rise, surrounded by a rusted wrought iron fence choked with weeds. It was a Gothic revival structure, its stone darkened by decades of crime and pollution. Pointed arches held windows boarded up from the inside, or gaping open like empty sockets. One of the heavy wooden front doors sagged open, a dark invitation. Taking a deep breath, I slipped through the gap in the fence and crossed the overgrown yard. The air grew heavy, still. Pushing the groaning door wider, I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, an overpowering mix of damp decay, pigeon droppings, stale air, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like rotting flowers. Dust motes danced in the beams of light slanting through cracks in the boarded windows and holes in the roof high above. The interior was vast and cathedral-like, amplifying the oppressive silence. Pews lay overturned or broken, scattered like bones. Graffiti covered the lower sections of the stone walls, crude tags interspersed with unsettling, vaguely occult symbols that made my skin crawl. Pigeons cooed and fluttered in the rafters, their movements echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling paint, water stains mapping the walls, and a thick layer of undisturbed dust coating everything, muffling my footsteps. A place of forgotten reverence. My gaze was drawn towards the far end, where the altar should be. The main altar platform was still there, stripped bare but structurally intact. A large, faded mural on the wall behind it depicted scenes I couldn't quite make out in the dimness. This felt like the focal point, the heart of the church's former purpose. I moved cautiously down the central aisle, flashlight beam sweeping side to side. Every creak of the floorboards under my boots sounded like a gunshot. I checked side chapels, empty, filled with debris. I scanned the pulpit, nothing. My attention kept returning to the altar. Its resting place whispers to those attuned, the message had said. What would whisper here? Approaching the altar, I ran my light over its surface, then knelt to examine the base. It was made of heavy, carved stone. Much of the decorative carving was damaged, but one section, near the floor on the side facing away from the nave, seemed different. Less weathered, perhaps. I ran my gloved hand over it. A faint line, almost invisible under the grime. A seam. My heart pounded. Using my fingers, I carefully worked at the edge of the stone panel. It resisted for a moment, then shifted inwards with a soft scraping sound. It wasn't stone, but wood or plaster, cleverly disguised. Behind it was a dark cavity, barely large enough to hold anything substantial. I shone my flashlight inside. And there it was. It lay on a bed of rotted velvet lining, the ceremonial dagger. It was exactly as I'd imagined, yet somehow more potent, more real. The handle appeared to be crafted from blackened, aged bone, intricately carved with interlocking symbols that echoed the pulsing sigil of the Ascended Hand's website. The blade was about 8 inches long, double-edged, dark metal tarnished with age but still hinting at a wicked sharpness. Strange, angular runes were etched directly onto the steel. It radiated a palpable sense of rawness, an object steeped in dark intent. For a moment, I just stared, frozen. It was real. Case 73B. The cult's trial. I had found it. Snapping myself back to the task, I raised my phone. My hands were shaking, making it difficult to focus. I took several pictures, ensuring the dagger, its hiding place, and the surrounding altar area were clearly visible. The phone's flash illuminated the cavity with stark, clinical light, momentarily dispelling the shadows and revealing the decay in brutal detail. The timestamp burned itself onto the digital image, 1947. Proof obtained. With trembling fingers, I accessed the secure channel through my phone's Tor browser. Navigated back to the private message from the administrator. Attached the clearest photo. Hesitated for only a second, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Then I hit send. The confirmation message was instantaneous, chillingly devoid of emotion. Image received. Verification pending. Await further instruction. I lowered my phone, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling in my stomach. I carefully pushed the disguised panel back into place, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the resumed silence. I hadn't touched the dagger itself, hadn't disturbed it beyond exposing it for the photograph. I had followed the instructions precisely. I stood up, dusting off my knees, suddenly acutely aware of the vast, empty space around me, the deepening shadows, the oppressive weight of the church's silence. The mission was over. I had passed their test. But standing there, in the heart of that forgotten place, with the image sent and the dagger hidden once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watchful. The confirmation message glowed unnervingly on my phone screen in the oppressive dark of St. Augustine's. Verification pending. Await further instruction. Await. Here? In this mausoleum of dead faith and decay? A shudder ran through me that had nothing to do with the chill air. The adrenaline high was crashing, leaving behind a residue of gritty fear and the metallic taste of adrenaline. I had done it. I had passed their bizarre test. But the sense of accomplishment was hollow, fragile. The silence pressed in, heavier than before, thick with unspoken implications. I needed to leave. Now. Staying here felt wrong, dangerous in a way that went beyond trespassing or the crumbling structure. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took one last look at the altar where the panel was seamlessly replaced, then turned towards the main doors, the only way in or out I knew of. My flashlight beam, still clutched tightly in my hand, swept across the floor as I turned. And stopped. There, starkly clear in the thick, otherwise undisturbed layer of dust covering the stone flags near the altar steps, were footprints. Boot prints. Large ones, with a distinct, deep tread pattern, nothing like my own worn hiking boots. They were etched sharply into the dust, edges crisp, indicating they were fresh. Very fresh. Made since the last rain shower stirred the dust, perhaps even within the last hour. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. Or at least, I hadn't been. Slowly, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I followed the prints with my light beam. They didn't lead to the altar. They didn't come from the direction I had entered. They originated from behind a large, shadowed pillar just off to the side of the chancel area, a perfect vantage point to observe the altar without being easily seen. From that shadowy starting point, the prince led directly away from the altar, stepping confidently down the center aisle, heading straight for the sagging main doors I had entered through. There was only one set of prints leading away. No matching set leading in. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. They weren't testing my ability to find the dagger. They already knew where it was. How else could they have described it, known its significance to Case 73B? Maybe they even placed it there recently, a lure perfectly tailored to my academic interests, clean from my digital footprint despite my precautions. The trial, it wasn't about the artifact at all. It was about me. They needed to confirm I was real, not just a digital ghost. They needed to know if I was physically present in this city, if I was capable, if I was willing to follow their cryptic instructions into the real world. They had guided me, like a rat in a maze, to this specific, isolated location. They had watched me from the shadows, watched me search, watched me find the hidden compartment, watched me photograph the dagger, watched me transmit the proof. The verification pending message wasn't about the photo quality. It was the signal. The watcher behind the pillar saw me send the photo, confirming the target was acquired and the test completed. And then they left. They weren't testing my devotion. They were tracking me, pinpointing me. They had bypassed all my layers of digital security with frightening ease by manipulating my curiosity, dangling the perfect bait to lure me out from behind the screen. The dark web wasn't the sanctuary, it was the spider's web, and I had willingly walked into it, thinking I was the observer. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. They were just here. Whoever left those prints could still be nearby, outside, waiting. Or worse, they weren't waiting. The prints led away, back towards the city, back towards civilization, back towards my neighborhood. They had what they needed, confirmation of my physical presence, my location narrowed down from anywhere in the world to this city, this section of the city, active at this time. I had to get out. Now. I bolted, stumbling down the aisle, trying to stay within the path of the footprints, irrationally afraid of disturbing any other evidence, though evidence of what, I dreaded to think. My flashlight beam jittered wildly, casting monstrous shadows that seemed to leap and writhe in my peripheral vision. Every scrape of my boot, every rustle from the rafters, sounded like pursuit. Bursting through the heavy, sagging door into the cool night air felt like surfacing from underwater, but the relief was momentary. The overgrown churchyard, the derelict street, the decaying industrial buildings, none of it felt safe. It felt exposed. Watched. I scrambled through the gap in the fence, tearing my sleeve on the rusted iron, and didn't stop running until I hit the slightly better lit main road several blocks away. My journey home was a blur of paranoia. Every pair of headlights approaching felt like it was slowing down for me. Every pedestrian walking towards me seemed to watch me too intently. The familiar cityscape felt alien, hostile. The shadows between streetlights seemed deeper, more menacing. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure detach itself from the darkness, but there was never anyone there. Or maybe there was, and they were simply better at hiding than I was at seeing. Reaching my apartment building felt like breaching a fortress, though I knew it was an illusion. I fumbled with my keys, triple-locked the door behind me, and leaned against it, chest heaving, sweat cooling on my skin. I drew all the curtains, plunging the small space into darkness, broken only by the blinking light of my modem. Safety. It was a lie. I sank onto the floor, legs weak, mind racing. The Ascended Hand. They weren't just some fringe group spouting philosophy on the dark web. They were organized. They were manipulative. They had resources. They operated in the physical world with chilling precision. They had identified me, targeted me, lured me, observed me, and confirmed my location. My burner profile, Veritas Seeker 88, my VPNs, my TOR browser, meaningless. Childish precautions against an adversary who understood that the digital world was merely a gateway to the physical. They hadn't needed to hack my computer. They had hacked me. My curiosity, my academic arrogance, my desire to peek behind the curtain, they had used it all against me. What now? Await further instruction? The thought sent ice through my veins. What would the next instruction be? Another trial? Or something more personal? They knew I was here. They knew I could be guided. What did they want with a criminology student who got too close? I sat there in the dark for hours, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, sounds that no longer felt like the comforting backdrop of urban life, but like whispers in the static, potential threats drawing closer. The feeling of being watched hadn't ended when I left the church. It had followed me home. It was settling over my life like a shroud. They weren't coming for me tonight. I felt that instinctively. They were patient. They had confirmed my existence, my location, my susceptibility. That was enough for now. The Ascended Hand had made its first move, not with a threat, but with a terrifying, calculated confirmation. They had reached out from the deepest web and cast a long shadow over my world. And I knew, with dreadful certainty, that this was only the beginning. They were watching, waiting, and I had no idea when or how they would reach out again.